Hi, and welcome to Attendant Care Education, also known as ACE training. My name is Nancy Diamond. I'm one of the registered nurses here at Granite State Independent Living, and our guest is?
Kirsten Hasty.
Who is?
Here to complete the Attendant Care Education program.
And you work for a consumer currently who's in the Consumer Directed program.
Yes.
So today we're going to go over a few different things that you don't learn in the home. Your consumer will teach you what they need in the home, how to lift, how to transfer, how they like their meals prepared, and they'll do a schedule with you. But there are some other things we're going to go over. We're going to go over the rules and regulations that govern your practice in the community. We're going to have a how-to section on our new electronic visit verification, also known as the telephone timesheet. We're going to talk about safety to you and the consumer, both by universal precautions and lifting precautions. And we're going to talk about our most favorite topic, avoiding Medicaid fraud, because neither you nor your consumer want to have inadvertent issues with that. So behind me, you're going to see a lot of the slides that we're going to go over, and we're going to start by looking at some of the things that we're going to have you fill out. You'll be getting from HR a paper that talks about you have had the training for your electronic visit verification. You're going to get a survey from HR and some other things. Please make sure that you return those so that they can give you credit for this course. But without further ado, we're going to go into our program. And it starts by talking about an attendant care oath. Now, we don't have you formally use the attendant care oath anymore, but it's still important. What we wanted to do with the attendant care oath was have people aware that this job is far more than if you were making cabinets. For instance, if you're making cabinets and you call in the morning, the cabinet's fine. It's going to sit there and it'll be there when you get back. But as you know, if you call in, who's there for your consumer?
Nobody. They stay in bed, they can't go to the bathroom, and it's a mess. And
It is a mess.
Impacts their lives greatly.
And so I hope that everybody who is working for Granite State Independent Living comes to the table with a good heart and a really good sense of dependability. It's not that you don't have sick days or vacations like anybody else. It's just please try to communicate things well and consistently with your consumer. Talk to them and try to come up with plans for backup. So in case you can't come in, you know how to help that person make sure that they are able to get out of bed in the morning. And I'd like to start by showing you the story of a woman who not only is a consumer of Granite State Independent Living, but who is also an employee of Granite State Independent Living. And her name is Jenny, and I'm going to ask Ian to go towards the board, and we're going to see Jenny's story. With both her energy and desire to be as independent as possible and our assistance and advocacy, she has a life again. And we're a part of it. Without that part, and without you being part of somebody's life, it wouldn't happen. So please understand how important you are to Granite State Independent Living and every person that you work for. So we're going to talk now a little bit about the history and what we do. And the slide next talks about the different offices that we have in New Hampshire. Granite State Independent Living is the only provider of personal care assistance, or the PCA program, and you'll hear lots of acronyms in this discussion today. You don't have to memorize any of them, but it's good to know because you might hear them, and when you do timesheet completion, they will come in handy, as we'll talk about later. So our offices are in Claremont, we have one in Littleton, in Berlin, in Nashua, in Concord, in Dover, and we have those because we serve over 600 people throughout the state, and we have over 1,000 employees that serve people. And when I say employee for this program, you're a co-employee with your consumer. So you work for your consumer directly, and that person is your supervisor, and we're going to refer to your consumer as your supervisor throughout this discussion. But you are co-employed by Granite State, and we'll talk about the responsibilities that we have to make sure that as an employee you have your needs met here as well. So you'll have the telephone numbers for any of our offices, but at any time you can always call our main office at Concord, which is 228-9680. You can ask to speak with myself, Nancy Diamond, another one of the nurses, or one of the many people here who will be able to help you with any questions that you might have. And we encourage you to call in because we don't want you to feel isolated out in the community. Our next thing is a little bit of history about Granite State Independent Living. We were established in 1980, and some of you might even work for the consumers that helped to found this program because they're still on our program. They're part of it. They do legislative advocacy, they do education in the community, and they live their life being proud of what they brought to New Hampshire. And Granite State Independent Living is the only independent living center in New Hampshire, and we are now here by federal mandate, and we are federally funded in part. And independent living centers in other states that have larger populations might have just a corner of the state to do, or there might be in Massachusetts, there are 15 IL centers, but in New Hampshire, it's us. And we provide 5 core services. And if you look at the slide, we do information and referral. And what that means is that people say, my gosh, I need to find transportation, I need a ramp to my house, I need so many different things. We have 2 people here, Kim and Erica, who are amazing resources. And just by calling that 228-9680 number, people can be put in touch with the different places that they need to go to have their needs met. We also have peer support. Jenny, whom you saw in the video, is working with our peer mentor program here at Granite State Independent Living. So some of the people, I think the nice lady that you work for is a mentor. She helps people who are coming on board and learning how to adjust to a disability, learning how to navigate the paperwork and everything. Mm-hmm. And then we have people who are mentees, who are people who are new to a program and saying, oh my gosh, do I really have to be a co-employer and learn all of these things? And we help to get people together. The other thing we do is skills training. So a nurse or a coordinator will go out at least every 60 days, but be available, be in between time. We tell people about new legislative happenings, about some things that they might do that might be appropriate to the season, such as getting a to-go bag ready for bad winter weather or things like that. And we also do individualized training. So if somebody has a new mechanism of transfer, for instance, if they're going from a stand pivot lift to an assisted stand lift, we might be able to go out and help them learn how to use it so they can then teach their employees. And also if employees say, geez, I just need a little bit more training, we're happy to help with that too. We have advocacy. Jeff Dickinson and Ryan Donnelly are 2 people who are both consumers and incredible advocates. They work at the legislative level in conjunction with the state representatives. They've helped to have legislation passed that is in the advantage of the disability rights community. But they're also resources for us. We can say, gee, what exactly does the law say about service dog care? And they will get back to us with accurate information. They're also resources to you. And finally, we have transition services. So we take care in our practice of folks who are from age 18 on. But there isn't a magic wand that happens when you're 18, when you transition from school services to adult services that just says, okay, now you're free, you know how to do everything. So we can be available to help people learn the skills that they will need to manage their program. The other thing we do for transition is we have a program called Nursing Facility Transition, or NFTRAN. And what that does is sometimes people end up in a nursing home because they've had a fall and broken a hip or had some kind of injury. And the next thing they know, they've been there for a year and they've lost their apartment and their storage stuff has disappeared and they don't know how to get out. So NFTRAN program sends a nurse in and we do an evaluation with a person, with them at the center. It's called person-centered planning. So we say, what do you want? Where do you want to be? What's important to you? And then we look at what their needs and desires are, what supports are available, and we help them develop a plan so that they can get home. So those are the 5 core services. Our next slide is our independent living philosophy, and I'm not going to read many things verbatim off the slide, but this is so important. You'll see that many of us at Granite State Independent Living and many of our consumers and workers hold a torch of social justice. And that is because our philosophy is that it represents that people with disabilities should have the same civil rights, the same options, the same control over their choices as do people without disabilities, which means that people have the same right to take risks, the same right to make good and bad decisions, the same right of access, the same right to vote. And not only does that show in our everyday care, but it shows in the way that we talk with people in the community, and you'll find a lot of us, even outside of our job, It's just who we are and what we do and what is important to us. And we hope that's important to you also, because that is the core of what we do, that a disability is just a thing. The person behind it is exactly that, a person with the same rights as everybody else. Next, we're going to talk about what is consumer direction. So I talked at the beginning of this discussion about a consumer-directed program, meaning that you were a co-employee of the consumer and of Granite State. That's different from many other programs. There are things called agency-directed programs, and that means that somebody picks up a phone and says, "Hi, I need somebody to come out on Tuesday and Thursday. Please send them. Thank you. Goodbye." And then the agency will hire that person, will train that person, will schedule that person and send them out. Now, that's all well and good, but what if the consumer doesn't like the person? What if the agency doesn't have a person? What if they don't like your hours? Some agencies will just staff from 9 to 5, Monday through Friday, and that's a big problem. Well, consumer direction gives control to the consumer. They can find the people they want. They can say, "These are the skills that I need you to have, and I'm happy to train you." Meet them face to face. Did you have an interview with your consumer?
Yes, I did.
So you got to meet her?
I did. We set a time, and I got to go into her home. She didn't obviously go through her whole process, because if she did, half the world would see her in undesirable ways.
Right.
But she did. She went, talked you through what she needed, how she wanted, her scheduling, big, and what holes she had open in her schedule.
So that's very different. With an agency, she wouldn't have had a chance to meet you in advance. Did you find that you felt a connection with her?
Yes, I did. She's very kind, and even though she does have some speech impediments, it's very nice to actually know that you get more than over the phone, I guess, is a way
Right.
to put it.
And that doesn't get to happen in an agency. So here at Granite State, a consumer-directed program, she got to meet you. You agreed that the hours are correct. She hired you. You got to do your paperwork with her. And she has control over her life. She's not just at the whim of the agency. "Oh, we're closed. It's Columbus Day. Too bad. You're going to have to stay in bed all day." Instead, she has the opportunity to work and maybe say, "Okay, well, if you want the holiday, maybe we'll do fewer hours on that day, but just help me get out of bed," or something like that. So there's an empowerment that people have in a consumer-directed program that doesn't exist in an agency-directed. So we're very excited to have that at Granite State Independent Living. So research also supports that consumer direction is healthful for people. Strangely, when you have an agency, you might say, "I need a girl at 8 a.m. because that's when I have to get up and I have to go to the bathroom and I need to get washed and I need to get dressed." And they said, "Oh, we'd love to have you, but we don't have anybody at 8 a.m. We can send somebody out at 9 a.m. And so that might mean that you're in bed longer, that you're at risk for pressure sores longer, that you might be at risk for a urinary tract infection because you haven't been able to go to the restroom. But under consumer direction, when you can direct a person and schedule them for the hours you need, then your needs are met in a more timely fashion. And I found it actually makes a difference in health.
It's also inconvenient because my consumer in particular has 5 different jobs. So if she needs to be somewhere by this time and they couldn't get someone out soon enough, she'd have to rearrange her whole schedule just to get there. Yeah.
Now, it's interesting that you make mention of 5 different jobs, and I happen to know this consumer and admire her tremendously. She's an amazing woman. But the thing that many people think of when they look at a person who's in a power chair or speak with somebody who might have a different type of speech pattern because of an injury or a disability, they very often think of that person as just sitting at home and receiving services. That's not the case here, is it?
They do. They make assumptions. For instance, my consumer had an interviewer who just showed up. She got her first, day, and she assumed, that she didn't wear underwear. Or little things like
That's
that. You
very
can't
interesting.
make assumptions.
Yeah. No, and it's very important to understand that each consumer is an individual, and even though somebody might have the same diagnosis, such as muscular dystrophy or multiple sclerosis, their needs might be very different.
Everybody's a different person.
Yeah,
Everybody
so
has
that's
those-
important to bring to the
Yeah.
table here. And in fact, we're going to have a slide about that later on, so it's perfect to have brought that up. So it improves health outcomes because a person is in control. It also improves customer satisfaction because you're having the things done when you need them done, so you can do the things that are important to you, whether it's work or recreation or hobbies or visiting with family. And it reduces a consumer's unmet personal care needs by providing individualized service. So somebody might be on a specialized diet, or they might, for instance, have diabetes and be on a controlled carbohydrate diet and still want to learn how to modify that for certain things. So they're not given the same thing day in and day out. They're able to work with people in order to come up with a plan that's individual to them. And it comes with better outcomes. It also is a good cost savings because, as you might imagine, to have somebody in an institutionalized setting such as a nursing home is very, very expensive.
Yes.
And at home, somebody pays their own rent, or somebody will go out and get their own groceries, and so that takes some of the tax burden off of people. So it's not just an advantage to the consumer, it's an advantage to society to be able to provide this. And there has been in the past some political discussion about there is an increase in fraud and abuse, and we're going to talk about Medicaid fraud a little bit later so that everybody can avoid that. However, what we have found when you actually look at the numbers is that it's actually less fraud than things like Social Security fraud and things like that. So that is a comment that many people make without knowing the actual statistical numbers. So Granite State Independent Living is kind of an umbrella of services. We do a lot of different things. In this discussion, we're going to be talking about two programs specifically. Both of them are consumer-directed. One is the PCA program, which is exclusive to Granite State. The other is the PCSP program, which comes from the Choices for Independence, or the CFI Medicaid waiver. However, we do a lot more than that at Granite State. We have the home care, so we do have that agency where you can pick up the phone if you don't want to be the person in charge. We have community economic development. We have programs for deaf and hard of hearing. We have a transportation program. We do recreational transportation if you sign up for our transportation program, so people get to access the community and not be in their home all the time just because they don't have public transportation or their own vehicle. We have employment support. We have benefits support. We have transitional services, as we talked about. So when you talk to Granite State, it's almost as though there are many different businesses under the same umbrella. Now, we talked just now about the PCA and the PCSP programs. Many of you will work for a consumer who only has one, and that makes it easy because you know which program you work for and what the parameters are and what the expectations are for that. However, many consumers have two programs. They have the PCA program, which is the basic Granite State program, and then they have the Choices for Independence waiver. And as an employee, you actually have to put on two different hats when you work for these programs because they have different things that are allowable. We'll talk about some of the differences. On the PCA program, the qualifications are that you need to be in a wheelchair 80% or more of the time, that you have to have a significant functional disability. That doesn't mean there's anything wrong with your brain or any problems with your cognition, just that your function is challenged, that you have to be on Medicaid, that you have to have at least 2 hours of personal care daily, and then there are some restrictions on that program. Family members, for instance, cannot work for you, so even if your mom, dad, brother, or sister has been historically providing you with a tremendous amount of care, they can't be paid on this program because of the way the law is written. And then the service can be delivered in non-institutional settings, such as the home, which is good. And there are very specific parameters where transportation can occur. So under the PCA program, you can provide transportation to a consumer's workplace, to a consumer's school if they're in high school, college, or other educational things. You can provide transportation to a grocery store so that that person can have groceries, and you can provide transportation to a laundromat if a person doesn't have laundry facilities in their home. And to do that, you might use the consumer's car, and they would have evidence of insurance on file with us, and you would have evidence of a non-impaired or non-restricted driver's license. And then in other situations, you could go with your consumer if you were not driving, for instance, to a medical appointment, but you cannot drive a consumer to a medical appointment and be compensated for it because that is a service that is provided by the managed care organizations. So that's the PCA program. The PCSP program, which is available through the Choices for Independence waiver, Granite State and many other agencies throughout the state provide that. It has looser restrictions. You just have to have a chronic disease or a chronic need for assistance, and a lot of persons who have the natural consequences of aging end up being on this because they might need help with their meals, they might need help with housekeeping, things like that. You need to be 18 years of older or older on both of these programs. But on the CFI, you do not need to be a wheelchair user, so that's a significant difference. And you might have a personal care representative to help you with it, so you don't have to be your own guardian on this program, and you do have to be on the PCA. And family members can be employed. So there are many differences between the two programs. And if you have any questions that your consumer can't answer, again, give us a call here at Granite State, and we are happy to talk about the differences between the two programs. However, in each home, your consumer has the care plan or the consumer reference sheet for that specific program, and that details on it the tasks that the insurance company has agreed to pay for on that program. So that will actually be your job description, and we'll talk about that a little bit more. So, any questions so far?
No, actually.
Yeah, and if you have questions at home, remember, we're here as a resource, and you can give us a call. Now I'm going to talk about something that your consumer helped to bring to Granite State Independent Living, and that's People First Language. Does that sound like something you've discussed with her before?
Oh, yeah.
Now, People First Language is a way that we help not just ourselves, but society to change their thinking and viewpoint of persons with different abilities. You can see I'm older than dirt. So when I was younger, it was rare to see a person in a wheelchair in the community, and everybody would stare. Who's that cripple over there? Oh, they're wheelchair bound. What's the matter with them?
Yeah, exactly. It's just the wording. It can be known as offensive. So
Yes.
she doesn't like the word bound because, like, those are her legs.
Well,
So-
and bound is like you're tied up in something. You know,
Yeah,
it sounds like you've
it's
been
her
kidnapped.
freedom. That's how
It
she
is her
sees it.
freedom. So the way that we ask that not only you speak with your consumers, but that you try to speak with everyone to help society realize that a person with a disability is exactly that, a person who happens to live with a disability. So instead of saying that they're handicapped or crippled, you would say a person with a disability, identifying that first you are a person.
As
And
a disability
that
doesn't
it
come first.
It happens to be there, it's something you deal with, but it's something you deal with. And you look at a person who uses a wheelchair, and you were just saying that your consumer doesn't like to be said you're wheelchair bound. That's right. So it is a person who happens to use a wheelchair as their legs. That's all. Some people happen to use crutches because they've broken their feet, or some people may use all kinds of alternative things to help them in their life, but it's something you use, not something that defines you. Other thing is, please, don't call a power chair an electric chair. That is something that people,
boy.
yeah. So sometimes you'll say, oh, look, she's got an electric chair. No, that's not an electric chair. It's a power chair that she happens to use. And you'll see on the slides that there are other examples of People First language that you can use, and all of them will make everybody's life better. We talked earlier about Granite State Independent Living being the co-employer for all of the attendant care programs that are consumer-directed. So you might say, if the consumer is doing all of that work, what does Granite State do? Well, we process all of the new hire paperwork, we do a criminal background check, we do safety plans when needed, we do timesheets, we now do the electronic visit verification, which is the advanced system that we'll be talking about a little bit more. So you're going to be able to call in, instead of those timesheets, you're going to be able to call in and say, hi, I'm here, and just enter some codes, and we'll talk about that in detail. But we're handling that so that you can be paid in a timely fashion. We bill Medicaid for the consumer, we make sure that you're covered by workers' compensation, and all of the things that you need as an employee in order to be safe and taken care of. And that's what Granite State does. And the responsibilities include, you'll have a registered nurse coordinator come out for the PCA program, or a coordinator for the PCSP program. We do the ongoing skills training. We have resources here, and that's really important. If you feel uncomfortable with anything in the community, if you don't think things are going right, or if you have any questions, please remember, we are your resource. It's 228-9680. All you have to do is pick up the phone. If we're not here, leave a message. We will get back to you. what are the consumer responsibilities? Well, they're the boss, and they run the program. So every insurance company has parameters of things that they pay. And that's how we make a person-centered plan using the things that the insurance company will pay for. And that becomes what the consumer will teach you with, will train you with, and you will bill for using the timesheets. So the consumer does all of that. They confirm that you've clocked in, you've clocked out, that the timesheets are correct, that the tasks are correct on it. And they are aware of the policies and procedures of Granite State Independent Living because it's one of the things that they learn as part of the onboarding process. So you look to your consumer for direction, and that is their responsibility. And it's a wonderful thing because it's not only a responsibility, it's a freedom. And it's that control, and it's that empowerment, and it's that acknowledgement of personhood. That, yeah, you're capable of doing this, you're an adult, you can certainly do that, and we trust you.
Being able to make their own choices.
Yes.
It's a big thing.
It is, because sometimes as your physical ability declines, there are fewer things that you can do. And so to retain control in your life is so important. And our respecting that brings dignity to the table. And I always applaud people who think about dignity and decency because it's a big deal. So, but wait, there's more. So your roles and responsibilities are that you have to make a commitment to maintain confidentiality. Many of us have heard about HIPAA.
Oh, yes.
Who hasn't killed the number of trees filling out HIPAA forms? But HIPAA applies to our work in the home also because what we are, no matter where we are with our consumers, we sort of have this cone of employment around us. So it is just as essential that we maintain confidentiality than if we worked in a hospital or in a dentist's office. And that includes things like not going by the home and saying to somebody in the car, oh, look, that's where I work. Because that also, although a casual comment, sort of is a breach of confidentiality. So you would never talk about anybody's health status, their name, their vacation plans, when they're alone, anything that might identify a person. So we are held to do that as a worker. Be able to perform the duties of the job. That's why you have the interview.
Mm-hmm.
And so do you think you'll be able to do this? Not that you know how to do everything, but that you feel that you'd be physically capable and mentally able to learn.
For instance, with my employer, it's more of like the fact of her transitions. Like you have to be able to lift that amount of weight, like
Right,
and do those
so you have a certain
tasks,
amount of
yeah.
weight. Yeah,
That's
and
why the interview is so important.
it is, and it's different for every consumer because some consumers use adaptive equipment, some people
Mhm.
have ceiling lifts, Hoyer lifts, stand lifts, some people
Oh, yeah.
have physical assistance to stand in a walker, some people use a gait belt. But you knew going in what you
Mhm.
were looking at, and then did you have training additionally once you got on the job?
Yes. So after the first initial interview, she brought in one of her other care attendants, and we actually went through the first process, and like she showed me a transition, and then I would copy the transition just to make sure I was able.
And that's perfect. That's actually one of the things that we don't mention that Granite State Independent Living provides at our own cost. It's called no-bill overlap training time.
Mhm.
So when a new employee comes on board and needs to learn a task like that might be a little complicated, there is the ability to speak with a coordinator and have that training time, which makes a big difference. So the attendant care worker has to be sensitive to individuals with disabilities and not judgmental, and be dependable, provide quality care, dress appropriately. And we happened to talk a little bit about that off camera today, about dressing
Yeah.
appropriately. Now, you and I have both done home care. I was in home care for 7 years, and there are situations, especially in the summer, when it's hot and steamy, you're in somebody's bathroom assisting them with their ADLs, their activities of daily living, or taking a shower, and you're going to die of the heat. And you might be
Yeah.
tempted to want to come in some clothing that is skimpy or have bare feet so that you don't get shoes wet. Don't. Remember that this is a job, and you wouldn't show up at the hospital in your pajamas. So please, when you go to your consumer's home, make sure that your top is covered, your bottom is covered, you have closed-toed shoes on to avoid being run over by a wheelchair and breaking your toes or many other things.
There's always ways to avoid it. Like you could always wear, like those water shoes with the closed toes in the
Absolutely.
shower.
Absolutely.
Or even just making sure that your t-shirt comes up high enough.
Right, and so it doesn't mean that you have to wear sweaters or anything. It
No.
just means that when you bend over, you're not exposing yourself. If you're a woman, if you're a gentleman who happens to wear baggy jeans, that they're not falling down and exposing your bottom. Just a professional attire that is respectful of your consumer and functional feel, so that you can do it. We also want you to make sure that you review the consumer's care plan. Now, I've talked about that a few times, and we're going to talk about it some more. On PCSP, there's a care plan that says the PCSP will do this, they are to do this, and it spells it out very clearly what your parameters of employment are. In the PCA program, there's a consumer reference sheet, and the reference sheet says PCA to assist with meals, PCA to assist with it. So if something is not listed on that, it's not a covered service for that person. So please be sure that you see that. If your consumer hasn't shared that with you, please ask them to. If they haven't been able to find this for some reason, again, give us a call. We'll provide them with one, and then you can have your training. So it is a very good way to solve that problem if you haven't seen it. We talk a little bit about billable tasks, and you'll look at the slide and it will say it may include many things. And that's true. These are all the tasks that might be billable, but you're not going to do these tasks with every person. Not every person needs all of the tasks. So that's why, again, that consumer reference sheet or the PCSP care plan is so important, because they say which of these specifically are billable for you. And that's, again, a Medicaid fraud issue, because if it hasn't been authorized by the insurance company, if it's not on the care plan or reference sheet, then it's not a service. I'll give you an example. A lot of people have pets in the community, and some people have service animals. Now, a cat might be a pet, and a dog who assists somebody might be a service animal, although there are other things as well. We're just going to use that for the example. So on a care plan, it will say service animal care. And if that is not on the care plan, then you may not care for pets in the home during your working hours, or that results in Medicaid fraud, which is billing for things that haven't been authorized. Now, I know when I was doing home care, a lot of times it'd say, but who's going to do it if I don't do it? And you may choose after your business hours to assist a person with somebody, or they might have other ways of having a friend come in and do that care. We're certainly not saying that somebody can't or shouldn't have pets, because again, we believe that everybody should have the same options. We're just saying that the insurance company only pays for that care under a very narrow range of circumstances. Have any questions? Give us a call. The plan of care, it says also referred to as the consumer reference sheet, depending on which thing you're on, talks about, again, if it's not on the plan of care and the consumer is asking for it, just let us know, because maybe we can add it to the plan of care, and then we can negotiate with the insurance company, and if they say okay, then it can be done. So sometimes it's not because it can't be done, it's just maybe it wasn't needed in the past. So let us know, let us communicate together, and maybe we can update that plan of care. Tasks that are never allowed would be heavy housework, such as washing the windows, washing the walls, painting, lawn mowing, things like that. That they are not allowed. It's light housekeeping. Again, we talked about any animal-related task, unless it's for a qualified service animal or an MD-ordered a companion animal, and we'll have a prescription on file for that, and we'll be able to answer any questions you might have about whether or not that's authorized. Yard work. Putting up or taking down holiday decorations, doesn't that sound like something that should be an easy thing? We're having a birthday party, can you put this banner up? You can't. You can't on your working time. And then playing cards or games, not that that's not a good thing, but insurance companies only pay for tasks, they don't pay for companionship. So companionship is available, but it's available under private pay or under different funding mechanisms, not under the programs we're discussing today. Some miscellaneous things. Housekeeping is for the consumer only. Your consumer, I believe, lives alone in her home. Is that
Yes.
correct? But not everybody does. A lot of people have families. Many consumers are married. Many consumers have children or may live with their parents. So when you're providing task assistance, please make sure it's for the consumer only. Now that might seem silly. You'll go in to do the laundry, and there's a basket full of laundry that's the consumer's, and maybe there's the household's towels, or there's just a few things for the child or something, and you'll say, well, we should put that in. That's another example of Medicaid fraud. The state is only paying for care to the person who is in a consumer relationship with GSIL. Other things where it can get a little sketchy would be dishes, for instance. I mean, you might go and you see a sink full of dishes and you say, well, my consumer only used this dinner dish, and yes, the meal was made for everybody so we can do the pots and pans, but you can't do the dishes for the rest of the house. And so that's important. We have a request that you have appropriate relationships and maintain boundaries with consumers, and we're going to talk about that a little more. This is one of the most difficult things in home care because you have a connection with your consumer. You have a situation sometimes where it's just you and your consumer for hours during the day. And you can get very close, but if you don't maintain boundaries, and again, we'll talk about that more, the relationships can get muddled, false expectations can occur, people have been accused of theft or misappropriation of money or misuse of money. We work very closely with a program in New Hampshire called the Bureau of Elder and Adult Services, or Adult Protective Services, or BEAS. It goes under many names. And in New Hampshire, it's against the law to exploit somebody for money or sexually or physically abuse them, emotionally abuse them, to neglect somebody or self-neglect. And if we get reports of that, the reports go to the state and they may go to law enforcement also. So when we talk about boundaries, it's not just a suggestion, it's a you must have good boundaries. So that brings us to the next one. It says social media, should you or shouldn't you? Friend me on Facebook. Yeah, we suggest not, and for many different reasons. And one of the reasons is that at some point you're going to post something you don't want your consumer to know. And that might be, I'm not going to be able to come in next Saturday, and you don't have to share why. You just have to tell your consumer that we have to make alternative plans for next Saturday, and then your consumer finds out that you went to the circus, that you did something, and they may be upset that you took time off from them. Well, you have every right to have your recreational activities in your life, but you don't want it to inadvertently cause hard feelings.
Of course.
That's it. So people will ask you, do you have children? Do you have this? And it's okay to share some stuff.
Social media just kind of like opens the door for miscommunication, and
Yes.
just you shouldn't do it.
Well, think about even if you are having those relationships with friends and family, it can cause issues sometimes.
Exactly. You can inadvertently like cross boundaries that you
Mhm.
shouldn't.
And so with the consumer, it's much more than that, so please don't. And then the hours worked as a PCA or a PCSP are not counted towards LS. So if you are a licensed nursing assistant in the state of New Hampshire, you need to have structured oversight in order to maintain your licensure. And in the community, your consumer is your supervisor.
Mhm.
So they are not able to maintain the need of hours for your LNA. Stop me at any time if you need to take a break.
Oh, no, you're fine. I said
Okay.
much.
So what are the roles of the registered nurse coordinators and the LTS, or long-term services coordinators? Because we said earlier that a coordinator will go out every 60 days and have a visit. So we develop and review the person-centered plan, but what we do a lot is we write that up and we submit it to the insurance company in such a way that it really demonstrates the functional deficits or the care needs that somebody has, so that they can get the funding so you can get paid. So that's our core job. But we assist with a lot of other things. We assist with specific education and skills training, and somebody would say, geez, I really would just like to go bowling. And we can help them find out where they can go bowling. You know, where can you get a wheelchair in? Who will allow this? Who has the specific adaptive equipment that you need? Do you want to go with a group of people? We have resources for things like that. So we are really a conduit for information. We also collaborate with the consumer to ensure a safe work environment. Now, as we talked about earlier, consumers are people, and people have a wide range of things that they do and like and act and everything. Well, it's the same thing with consumers. So we have everything from a person whose house is so clean that you could literally eat off the floor to a person with a hoarding issue. And it is very difficult for somebody to go in and work under a situation where there's hoarding. So we help to develop a plan that might be in conjunction with other healthcare providers and with the worker and with the consumer so that they can receive the care that they need, but not put you as the worker at risk. Because you are just as important to us as a worker as our consumers are, and we want to make sure that everybody is safe. Communication. This is our next topic. You had talked just a few minutes ago about how communication can be a problem on social media.
Oh, yeah.
Well, it's very strained sometimes in the home when it's just you and a consumer, and we all bring our own things to the table, and the way somebody says something can influence us in a way that wasn't expected or anticipated by the person who's speaking. And how do you deal with that in the home? Well, it's hard. But we have a few suggestions. One is the importance of listening. So try to carefully listen to what your consumer is saying. Your consumer has challenges speaking, and are you finding her easier to understand now that you've been with her for a while?
It's just a time thing because you learn like the different patterns and what she's trying to say, and also you can like look at her mouth and kind of
And
piece
you know
it
what's
together
going
more.
on
Yeah,
and
exactly.
things like that.
Sometimes you have to be like, can you repeat this?
Exactly.
Or ask for some more like instruction. Be like, okay, you want this done, but how do you want it done? Do you want me to do it this way, or that sort of
And
thing?
that's the way you support her individual choice. But you're actually saying what the slide says in back of you, which is hysterical. Those are exactly the skills that you need to. So if somebody says something and you think you understood it, but you're not sure, ask them to repeat it. And most people would rather repeat it than to have you get it wrong. So if they're asking you to please put, the purple powder in their sundae so that they can have their special treat today, and you put the pink powder in, they'd be disappointed. But if you had asked, then you'd probably have it right. So you can ask somebody to repeat, or you can say it back. Would you like me to do the laundry first, and then after that start supper? And they, no, I wanted you to do supper first so that it can be cooking while you do the laundry. So you give somebody a chance to straighten out your misunderstanding of that. The worst thing you can do is just assume that you heard them correctly. So please don't do that. Please ask for clarification or say something.
And when you assume, it kind of leaves that door open for more mistakes too to be made.
And sometimes the consumer won't say anything because they're like, oh, well, she did the best she could. But frustration can build up over time, and you
just
want
wanna
to
avoid it.
Yeah, you want to just avoid it. That's it. Sometimes, that's a nice segue though, thank you. Sometimes though, tempers flare, and pain has a lot to do with that. Declining function may have something to do with that. Something that you don't even know about that happened in a person's day may contribute to their current emotional state. Now, many people who have difficulty talking or have progressive diseases that weaken them have to take very deep breaths and may seem as though they're yelling very often, and not necessarily your person, but many people may. And many workers have come to me and said, oh my gosh, my consumer's yelling at me all the time.
Wow.
But what it is it's a breath technique that they have learned so that they can speak at all. Because without taking that extreme breath, or some people will yawn to try to take in extra air and then speak loudly and quickly to get their message across. So there are things like that that don't require de-escalation, require understanding. But there are other times when people can get very snippy or very grumpy, or however you might want to put it. And then people can even go further than that and really be having behaviors that make you concerned. So what do? You don't want to run out and abandon your person, so you want to try to do what's called de-escalate them or bring it down. And some very good techniques to do that are to be empathetic and non-judgmental, which means just listen and say, I see how you might feel that way. Yep, I can see how. So not that you necessarily agree with the person, but that you can understand their perspective. Sometimes somebody just wants somebody to understand their frustration with a situation.
It's kind of like a vent and let off some
It
steam.
is.
You know?
Yeah, that's a good way. And if you can just let somebody vent sometime and not take it personally, that will help. Respect personal space, though. If somebody is really starting to become upset, sometimes you see body movement that is more exaggerated. And so you want to make sure that you're far enough back that you don't inadvertently get hit. Not necessarily intentionally, but if somebody's going like that and all of a sudden you're there, it's not a good idea. So try to give some personal space. Also, when you're in somebody's personal space, that can be a little challenging for a person, so it might make them feel more threatened. So give somebody some space. Use non-threatening verbal techniques, and what that means is that the more a person loses control, the less likely they are to hear your words because they become very wrapped up in what they're doing. So keep your body neutral. A lot of people are like, yep.
Like calming gestures.
Yes.
Like, okay, like I understand.
That's open, but that's beautiful. That's open. That's exactly what it is. So you don't want to say, well, when you're done having your fit, give me a call, and then maybe I'll get you your glass of lemonade. That's not going to de-escalate a situation. That might even create a situation.
Fuel the fire.
Yes, it might fuel the fire. So do what you say. Okay, just be open and receptive. Again, far enough back that you're not leaving yourself at risk, but to let the person know that you're not challenging them. And it may not bring everything down, but it won't bring it up either. So
Exactly.
that's important. And then avoid overreacting. Remain calm, rational, and professional. Take a deep breath inside. Hair goes in and out, blood goes round and round. This is okay. And then that can help how you respond to a
You just
situation.
gotta remember that they're also like your boss. You are in like the professional environment. Would you ever yell at your boss? No, kind of like that sort of situation.
And we hope our boss would never yell at us, but in this situation, sometimes it can happen, and that these are ways of dealing with it. If you continue to feel uncomfortable or if you feel unsafe at any time, you can certainly leave and call Granite State to let us know, or call, the person will have an emergency phone list that you'll be familiar with. They may have a friend or relative that comes to help. So I don't ever want you or anyone else to put yourself at risk, but at the same time we want to be as supportive as possible and not just run at the first sign of discomfort. Does that make sense?
Yeah, you don't want to just abandon your...
Exactly, for many reasons. Some other things are focusing on feelings to try to find out what the person's real message is, because sometimes they will just say, I cannot have this same meal one more time, when they might be truly upset about their financial situation and they can't afford to have the steak that they want, or they might be upset because they are on a controlled carbohydrate diet because they're diabetic and just really want a piece of cheesecake. I mean, there are messages behind the behavior sometimes. Ignore challenging questions. If somebody says, who do you think you are, God? Just let it go, because there's no good answer. Either you are or you're not, and either way you lose. So, is it? But you can at some point set limits. So I understand how you're feeling, and I know that you wanted to get out so that we could go and do your grocery shopping. How can I help you? Put it on the person. How can I help you? What would you like me to do first? And try to give some positive choices so that you can begin to give power back to the person, let them know that you're not threatening their authority, but that you are available so that they can move forward. And allow time or allow silence for reflection. Sometimes people just, as you said, need to vent, and they just need us to sit there and listen. And when they're done, and give them a little time to calm down. So say, would you like a glass of water or something, and I'll go do the dishes, and then we can, get back together
It's that
after.
breathing room. It's
Breathing room, that's a nice way to put it.
It's a time to calm down off that escalated state and just to avoid the problem.
Yeah. People who are watching this video wouldn't believe that you just walked into the room this morning not expecting this to happen, because you are so professional and so
Thank you.
much a part of this conversation. But so are all of us. I mean, this is what we all have to bring to the table, and every one of you are valuable. But thank you, not me. Thank you for that. We talk about in de-escalation that it's better to solve the situation than be right. Well, that's hard, because a lot of people would like to be right. Nope, it's my way or the highway. Nope, this is the way I've been doing it since God was a child. There's so many different things like that. But sometimes it's just better to put an end to it. Okay, if you really want to have Oreo cookies in your breakfast cereal, it's your breakfast cereal. It's fine.
It's not like you have to eat Oreos in your breakfast cereal.
That's
just let
right.
it happen. It's their choice.
So just, okay, I don't have to be right. You can do it. Show empathy, which is active listening and validation of the person's feelings, just like we talked about. I can see how you'd feel that way. I might feel that way as well, or I might not. Say, I don't think I could really understand how you're feeling, but I hear what you're saying. I respect what you're saying. So, of course, I won't understand what it's like to have a spinal cord injury, but that doesn't mean I can't respect that you are having serious issues with it, and I see how this is impacting your life. So that's important. And look like you mean it. Just say, yeah, whatever. That's not going to be helpful. And provide productive solutions, not absolute. Like, I will never do that. Or, you've got to always do this. Say, what if we try this or that? Or, what do you think about that? Again, give choices that might not be, I'm just going to, throw all the dishes on the floor and then I can use paper plates and don't ever have to worry about this again. Boundaries. I told you we'd get to boundaries. Here we are. A person who used to be with Granite State Independent Living gave us this definition of boundaries, and I am going to read this because I believe this. Boundaries define the limits and the responsibilities of the people with whom you interact in the workplace. So that means that your consumer has limits, that you have limits, that there are places that you don't go in the workplace, that there are places it's okay to go in the workplace, and that's what boundaries are. So remember that both parties have the right and the responsibility of maintaining boundaries. So we talk about boundaries that you are putting down, for the consumer, but the consumer also should have boundaries with you, because you are a professional person who is employed in their home, again, with this cone of employment around you. And then, again, we talk about keeping your personal life personal. Don't bring it into the workplace. People are going to ask you if you're married. People are going to ask you if you have children. So it is certainly appropriate to say yes or no to that, but you wouldn't say, yes, and he's a real jerk. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
That's the boundary. You don't go into any issues that you might be having, whether they're financial or interpersonal or medical or anything. That's the boundary.
My consumer, for instance, actually has a care attendant right now who sits and talks a lot. And she won't even get to bed on time because of it, and it frustrates her. So if those boundaries haven't been crossed, she actually goes to bed on time. But when she doesn't, I have to deal with her being slightly cranky in the morning because she didn't get enough sleep, It's just, it takes a toll.
Well,
because of that boundary.
That's interesting, because that's actually also an employer issue on her part to manage caretakers, and sometimes consumers are concerned if they say the wrong thing, you might not come back, and they'll be left at risk.
It's so hard for some consumers to actually find help, reliable help.
Reliable help and competent help, or people who are caring, that sometimes they will modify their boundaries a little bit, but you've given me an opportunity to have a conversation with her now, so that will come up. And that's another good thing. If you think that conversations need to happen, call us. That's one of the things that we are happy to do, and it's privileged to do. And you just gave me the opportunity to do that, and I'm sure there are many other people who are watching this who are saying, well, geez, yeah, something like that's happening in my house, and it would be easier for everybody if it didn't. A consumer just might not know how to approach it.
I mean, it's not like the biggest problem in the world. Maybe she goes to bed like a half hour late, and she deals with it because they're friends and they talk, and, it's that sort of thing. But you also have to remember that they have the life that they need to live, like they need to go to bed.
Well, and actually there's another aspect of that too, because if that person is billing for the time that they talk, if they're asking to be paid for that time, that's actually Medicaid fraud, because nowhere on any care plan does it say
Time
hang
for you to
out,
vent.
hang out with your consumer and tell her how things are going in your life. Yeah, so it's important to know for many things. It doesn't mean you can never talk. It doesn't mean you can never have a conversation. It just means that do it while you're doing something that's on the care plan.
Exactly. Make it productive.
Make it productive. I like that. So what are professional boundaries? Well, they allow for safe connections between you and your consumer. They allow you to understand what your role is, what their role is. The importance is to avoid many problems that you can have. When you take on the emotional burden of your consumer, you might be susceptible to burnout, which means that there comes a day where you just can't deal with this anymore. And we want you to be there for the long run. Your consumer wants you to be there for the long run. So again, if you avoid taking on that emotional burden, you may at least delay burnout, because sometimes it just happens because it's exhausting to provide care forever. And there are ways we're going to talk about to make that less likely to happen. The other thing is that you can stay focused on the appropriate services, and the consequences are compassion, fatigue, but also workers may act unethically because you might take on burdens. And now we're going to talk about one of them, which
This
is
one
money.
bothers me.
How does it bother you?
My consumer actually had a person that she just had, well, she fired her, but she was asking to borrow money all the time, and she never actually got that money back. Like, you know, like those sorts of things.
That's very interesting. And again, we don't always that, because sometimes consumers are embarrassed to admit that they have done that, or they feel that it's their own problem. That's a crime, actually. That's theft that you're talking about. And money is one of the areas where it is very difficult. To tell you a story that actually happened. There was a consumer who had a wonderful worker, and the worker had pretty good boundaries. And they went along and they were doing things, and at one point the worker said, I'm not going to be able to come in Wednesday or Thursday, whatever day it was. We'll say it was Thursday. And that's all they said, which is all they should say. They don't have to say why. It could be the car broke down, my child has a dental appointment, it could be many things. But the consumer pushed, because the consumer didn't have somebody who was easily able to come in, and they liked the person. You know, they wanted the person to come in. And they were great. At first, she was able to maintain that boundary, but eventually she said, well, I don't have gas money. And the consumer's like, oh, for heaven's sakes, if that's what it is, you need to come in, because if you don't work, you're not going to get paid. I need you to come in because I need your help. Let me give you $10, get the gas, you're going to get paid the next day,
Exactly.
and give it back to
doesn't
me.
have to even be a large amount of
Right.
money, like $10 here,
Well,
$5 there, but it
And
adds
it worked, but it worked. The worker actually gave the consumer back the money. It worked fine. But the next time, the boundary wasn't so good. So it
Well, and
happened
already been
again.
crossed. It got foggy.
It did. So it was easier, and instead of saying, I can't come in Thursday, it became, can I borrow $10 for gas until I got paid? And even that continued to go all right for a while, until it didn't. Until they thought they had paid the consumer back, the consumer thought they had not been paid back. Tensions got terrible. The consumer reported the employee for theft. The employee went on the Bees registry and was charged with a crime, because there was no paper trail, there was no anything. So I'm not saying if you borrow money, you have a paper trail. I'm saying don't. Just don't. As innocent as it might be, do not borrow. Do not lend either. Because what if your consumer asks you for money? Say, I really appreciate the fact that you might need it. How else can I help you? Maybe discover sources so you can have your needs met. If you can't help them, call the coordinator. We have grants here at Granite State Independent Living that might be able to be used for that. We have a serendipity fund for people who have used it for air conditioners and warm winter coats. You know, so we might have resources. Please don't take it upon yourself as an employee to try to solve somebody's financial or medical or living situation difficulties. They have other resources. So that's the money. It's never appropriate for anybody to ask or lend. There are other types of things that could be actionable offenses, and sexual harassment is one of them. So sexual harassment goes two ways. We certainly may never sexually harass a person, and our consumers may never harass us in the context of our employment. And it's important to remember that the sexual harassment is defined by the perception of the person. So what might seem to us just like a funny joke might be horrifying to a consumer, and if it's of a sexual nature, it will be considered sexual harassment. And the same thing would happen if a consumer were to make an off-color joke with us. Now, again, we talk about people coming from all backgrounds with disabilities. So just as in society, there are people who are sexually inappropriate, there are people who are sexually inappropriate in the disability community too. And one of the ways that people are cultivated as sexual abuse victims is by starting slowly with things like jokes or just inappropriate comments.
You have to make the boundary.
You
gotta
have
set
to make that
line,
boundary and
saying,
say, this
I'm
is the
uncomfortable
workplace.
with this. This is not something I'm okay with, and just make sure that they realize that is not all right.
That is exactly it. Not everybody is comfortable saying that. We hope that you are, but if you're not, we're here to help you say it.
And you should
And you're not
never-
going to lose your job.
I was gonna say you should never
Yeah.
let that happen for fear you're gonna lose
Right.
your job.
Yeah,
or
because you're
anything
not
like
going to
that.
lose your job, you're not going to have an issue. If for some reason the interpersonal relationship between you and your consumer is tense or isn't working out, you still aren't going to lose your job because we have 100 other consumers who would probably love to have you, and we know you have good boundaries, so we would love to keep you. So we'll find you another place if where you are isn't working. But the most important thing is to know that if sexual abuse happens to you, it's not your fault, it's the fault of the perpetrator, and we are here to support your dignity and whatever else you need to make sure that everything is okay. You just have to let us know. So please, if anything like that ever happens in the workplace, call Human Resources or your coordinator or our main number and just say on the voicemail, please, I need somebody to call me back. And we'll do that, and we will help resolve the issue, and it will be a lot of your choice about what happens, so don't think that we're going to mandate things either. So sexual harassment is unwanted invitations, offensive jokes, same-sex harassment, inappropriate touching. It can be inappropriate texts or emails or postings, which again, you stay off of social media, it's not such an issue. Or sex is an implied condition of continued employment. Well, if you work here, you're going to do what the other people do. And so that is sexual harassment. And it's also, again, you have that code of employment. So if you're with your consumer and you are with somebody else and you are a victim of sexual harassment, that still is not okay. So please let us know if at any time during the course of employment anything happens that you're uncomfortable with. So don't ignore what's happening. Don't let somebody accuse you of not having a sense of humor, because sometimes that's what happens at the beginning. Oh, what's the matter? You're not adult enough to listen to that? And that's a way of grooming somebody to put up with sexual harassment. Don't blame yourself. It has nothing to do with you. You didn't start it.
That has
Know
nothing
your
to do
rights.
with being an adult either.
It does not. It has to do with boundaries.
Exactly.
And this is my place of employment, and this is not how we discuss things in my place of employment. And reach out to us immediately, because we can't fix what we don't know. And again, it's not the intent of the action. Maybe somebody's really trying to be humorous, but they're not, and it's the impact the action has on us. So how does it affect us? Okay, we're going to talk about safety in the workplace now. So what could put you at risk in the workplace? We lift a lot.
Oh, yeah.
We lift.
Like, there was one time, actually, like, my back was sore. Not from anything she did, but I was like, oh, what, can I have this morning off just to rest a little bit? And she's like, was there anything I did? And I said, no, of course not. Like,
But taking care of yourself is really
Exactly.
important, because getting hurt at any point in your life might impact the rest of your life. There are techniques to use that can be helpful that can reduce the risk.
exactly.
And so safety has to do with lifting, safety has to do with exposure to things. We might be using cleaning fluids in the home that will have precautions on the label that you should read. We talked a little bit about power chairs earlier, how we have to protect our toes. So in your employment agreement, it says that you'll always wear closed-toed shoes. And I loved your idea about using the aqua shoes in the
Yeah,
shower.
the
That
water
was
shoes.
fabulous. I'm going to tell other people that too. But the thing is, if you have ever been run over by a power chair, you will realize that they weigh about 300 pounds plus the weight of whoever is in it. And usually what happens is the person will feel them go up on your toe and stop moving because they don't want to do it, but they stop on your toe. So it's not comfortable. Closed-toe shoes are really great. So safety, fire safety. You know, we cook in somebody's home. Some of our consumers smoke, and you don't have to work in a smoking home, but if you choose to. Some of our workers have medical marijuana in the home that also might have lighting materials available. And if a fire happens, we don't insist, but we ask that all of our consumers have fire extinguishers. Know where they are. Know where they are. Know how you will get out of the home in the event of an emergency. In some cases, people work in towers, and the protocol is that you close the door, you put a towel under the door, and that you wait for 911 to rescue you either through the door or out of the window. So to know what those parameters are. Know where the emergency exits are. A lot of places are required to have 2 exits, but one of the exits is a window, and it's rough to get a power chair out a window. So know where your exits are. Make sure they're cleared. And that includes, you'll notice on PCA care plans often that it will say walkways to remain clutter-free for access. So that includes toys, that includes leaves in the fall, that includes snow in the winter. You may be asked to shovel somebody's porch or walkway. It does not include shoveling the driveway or anything heavy like that, just to make sure that the exits are cleared. And that is what that is for. And talk to your consumer about what should we do before there's an emergency, or if we're in the community and something happens, who should I call? So knowing that in advance saves a lot of grief if a situation arises. So there are some preventative things that we can do. Sometimes persons may have visual impairment that we work with, or they may have other types of impairment that makes it difficult for them to see hazards. And you might go in and say, oh my gosh, you've got your power chair and your Hoyer lift and your radio and your jacuzzi all plugged into the same thing, and that is an accident waiting to happen because that circuit is overloaded. Or some people might have extension cords across the room.
I used to work at a retirement home, so a lot of them have visual impairment, but there was actually this one woman that plugged, you know like how you can have the longer extension cords? Plugged an extension cord into an extension cord times 5.
Times 5. That's
horrible.
interesting. And that, of course, increases the heat, which can increase the chance of a fire. Some people have them on the floor, and when you go back and forth over cords in a power chair, it wears off the insulation and the
expose
cover.
the wires.
Right. And then that can arc, and there's nothing good about that. So we as employees have a responsibility, whether we're here at Chanel Drive, to look around, or in somebody's home to look around and say, maybe we should move that. Maybe we should think about not.
Unsafe.
Maybe it's a little unsafe. So you have the right to bring that up, and if it's something that really concerns you that the person isn't willing to resolve, who are you going to call?
Giselle?
You got it. So in emergency preparedness, one of the things that we can do is we can assist somebody in changing the batteries in a smoke alarm every 6 months. They suggest that you do it at daylight savings time. We can help with that. We can say, gee, you want to test this and make sure that it works, which is not a bad thing. It's good to know that the fire alarms work. We, again, ask people to have a fire extinguisher. Know how to operate appliances. Consumers are very familiar with their appliances because they live with them, but I might go into a home and I have an electric stove and I haven't dealt with this beautiful Viking gorgeous gas stove that you have, and I have no idea how to turn it on. So learn how to do that. Have somebody tell you.
Don't assume, because you could just
Don't
leave the gas
assume.
on with a little spark,
Right.
you
Bang.
could blow up their whole kitchen.
And they say there's no such thing as a stupid question. I'm not sure I quite agree with that, but there's often very good reason that we're asking the question. And then we have some more acronyms here. Have a SALI form on file with EMS. Well, a SALI form basically is a form that they put into the 911 system, and it has the consumer's telephone number on it, and should that telephone number come up, it may say a short sentence like, consumer uses a wheelchair for mobility, requires complete evacuation assistance in an emergency. And I know this because I help people fill them out all the time. They're really important. Not everybody wants that information there, and they might say, oh, the local fire department knows me, they're over here all the time. But the issue might be that the local fire department might be engaged in a fire and they have to call something called mutual aid. So you're calling somebody from another community over who has no idea who you are.
And never mind if they even hire new employees, you have new firefighters, new EMTs, they
That's a
don't know
good
that
point.
you need help that fast.
Yep.
So
And in this way, they can bring the right equipment into the home instead of going in and having to go back.
Exactly, it's that
and
extra
time,
communication.
Yeah, that time can cost lives. So discuss any concerns with your consumer. That's always the place you should go. If you say, oh my goodness, you're developing a wound. Oh my goodness, your refrigerator is running hot and it looks like it's about to break down. Oh my goodness, there are wires. Talk to the person first. Just the same respect that you would give to a homeowner. It's like, gee, I was over your house last night and I noticed that there's this big glowing thing in the back of your refrigerator. You talk to the person. You don't just immediately go and call somebody else. But if that doesn't work, you do bring it up the chain, so to speak, and you would call us, and then we can go over. And you know what? Somebody still has the right to do what they're going to do. And at that point, we might have to assess safety. Well, you have the right to do it, but is it safe for a worker to be in the home under those circumstances? So that's where we come in to try to balance everything.
Mhm.
So people have the right to make good and bad choices, and you as an employee have a right to maintain your safety and decide if those bad choices might be something that
Affecting you.
affect you. Exactly. General emergencies. So in the event of an emergency, most people know to call 911. But what often happens, especially if you work for more than one consumer, is you might forget where you are. Believe it or not, the tendency is to give your home address. So you might be using your cell, so EMS doesn't have an automatic 911 come up when you're using a cell phone. And if you give your home address, they're going to go to your home to see what's going on. So know the address of where you are. And a lot of consumers, we've asked them to put it either in a book by where you sign in or on the refrigerator or somewhere where it's easy to find. But know where you are and be able to tell people, when the emergency is over, please let us know, certainly not in the middle of an emergency. And then there's something that's mandatory called a change of status sheet. And that is available to the consumers on the MyGSIL website, or you can call in to a coordinator and we can fill one out for you. And a change of status sheet, let's see, do we go into that yet? No, we don't. We'll talk about that more later. But anytime there is an emergency or somebody is become ill or developed a sore or something, we do that. And it's not so that we can speak to somebody in a way that forces them to take action, but it's so we can say, we saw this, we observed this, this is what we did, and now it's in your hands. So we'll talk again more about that in a little bit. One thing that I don't have on this slide is, what do you do if somebody has a do not resuscitate order?
You got the BMTs.
Where did you come from this morning? You are so perfect. That is the answer. So what happens is many people, because of their personal philosophy or because of their health status or whatever the reason is, because it's an individual choice, have decided to have a do not resuscitate order, which means if I have a heart attack or something, don't do CPR. And very often people will spell out more than that, but at the very basic, it's don't do CPR. They will have a very large pink sheet that they put on their refrigerator, because that's where all EMTs look, is on the refrigerator, just to see if that is there. And they will have a wallet card or something to bring with them as well. So what our role is to exactly do that. If you are having a heart attack or choking to death, call 911, and then the EMTs will make that decision.
I'm not a medical professional. I leave that to
Even
the medical
but
professionals.
I'm telling you, even if you worked, I would call 911, and I'm a nurse, because I'm not going to sit there with somebody who's dying on the floor,
No.
and that's it. So, yeah, so that's the procedure for the DNR. More work safety. If you're working in a hospital, we have these lovely little hazardous waste containers on the wall, and we have these lovely
needles
little
and sharps
needles and
and-
sharps, and we have people that come around and clean this, and they do that, and they make sure you're not exposed to this, and we have this wonderful blood-borne pathogen cleanup kit, and not so much in the home.
I know.
So it's very, very important that you be aware of your environment. Many people are diabetics. Some people have human growth hormone injections. Some people have many different types of things. Sometimes the visiting nurses are in and do vitamin K. Just lots of different potential for shock. Diabetics often have the needles for that,
Yeah,
and the
milk crate.
AccuCheck things. And not everybody puts it in a good container. We recommend in the home that you have a soda bottle or a bleach bottle or something like that is
With a
plastic
closed
and that you
top.
can close. But some people will use their insulin and leave the needle in the bed. It's happened more than once. It's not, I'd like to say it's uncommon. It's not uncommon, because that's where a lot of people do their evening insulin and they forget about it. Or in the trash. So be aware of that. If you're going to push down the trash, use something to do it. Use a broom handle or something. Don't put your foot in it. Don't put your hand in it. There could be cans, needles. You don't know. You just don't need that to happen.
Take the precaution.
Take the precaution, yeah. Try to avoid repetitious movements. So there's a lot of things that we do that require the same movement. You know, we're bathing somebody, we're wax on, wax off, as they say, doing the same thing. But try to interrupt it with an activity that has a different motion so that you don't get repetitive motion injuries like carpal tunnel syndrome or problems with your joints. Use standard precautions or universal precautions. We're going to talk about that a little bit more. Universal precautions are the precautions that you take with everybody at all times to lessen the chance of disease transmissions. Do that. Don't overexert yourself, because if you're tired, you are far more likely to be injured. So be careful with
So
that.
more likely to make a mistake.
You are, and it's not intentional, it's not out of any malice, it's just because you're tired, and that's what happens. So if you do get hurt on the job, you must call Granite State Independent Living within 24 hours. We are self-insured. It doesn't mean there's going to be, pardon me, somebody there to answer the phone. It just means you must call us. Hi, this is Jane Doe. I work for Bobby Kennedy, and I was trying to help him out of bed, and the bed broke and it fell on my foot and I've got a broken toe. Please give me a call, blah, 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 your telephone number. And that way, a number of things happen. It immediately allows us to start the workers' compensation process so that you will be covered, which is the behind the scenes. Well, we can also give you a call. Is there something we can do to help? We can help the consumer. You might be out or something. So, but we can't do it if we don't know.
Mm-hmm.
So please let us know if anything like that happens. Body mechanics, we talked about. Always wear shoes that will protect your feet from injury, but also it's good to have non-skid surfaces, because back to that bathroom situation again, if you slip in the bathroom and you hit your head and the person's lifeline is off because you're happening to help them in there, here they are under the shower, the water's going to turn cold eventually, they can't call, you can't call, not a good situation. Not that that could never happen, just that you try to lessen the possibility of it happening. And we talk about lifting. Why? Because in healthcare, our backs are at risk. It's just an occupational hazard, because we're bending to get this, we're reaching on the floor, we're rolling somebody, we're helping them transfer, you're going in a Hoyer lift, you're going onto the commode, so many different things. But there are very definite steps that we can take that, again, will lessen the possibility of us injuring ourselves. And these are three of them. Keep your feet flat on the floor, about hip length apart. So if you're on tippy toe or something, you're going to be at more risk of strain or stress or injury.
Especially where you're off balance.
And you're off balance, you're at risk of falls. Keep your back straight. Lower your body to get close to the object. And I'm sure people watching this video have heard this a lot. Lift with your legs, not with your back. And what that means is you go down and you squat down and you hold on to something, and then you use your legs to pick it up instead of bending over and then using your lower back muscles to pick up, because those lower back muscles are not designed for that, and they are not strong enough to pick up weights like that. The other thing is, sometimes you just have to say, no, that's too heavy for me, because your consumer may want you to move their credenzas so that you can vacuum underneath it, and that just might not be a good idea. Or they might have a power recliner, and those things weigh a lot because of the motors in it. So, again, boundaries are not just about emotional things and interpersonal relationships. Sometimes they're about safety. And that's a safety boundary that you would put down. So now I think we're going to look at a video. Oh, no, we're going to talk about transfer equipment soon. See, this comes of my thinking. I know the next slide. Transfer equipment in the home. Dun, dun, dun. Transfer equipment comes in many ways. Not that long ago, and we talked about Granite State having been founded in 1980, so before 1980, if you needed transfer equipment, if you weren't able to get up, or if you didn't have a strong person in the house who was physically able to pick you up and move you, you went to a nursing home. Didn't matter how old you were, didn't matter how intact your thought process was. You're going to a nursing home because there wasn't a physical way to manage your needs in the community. Then adaptive equipment came in, and then, even better, electric adaptive equipment came in. So you'll have things like Hoyer lifts, which enable somebody to be assisted to move in a sling. They can go from bed to commode to shower chair to wheelchair, all different kinds of things. Sometimes you get the grand thing, and you have ceiling tracks that go along with this, so those are everybody's dream. There are stand pivot boards, there are stand pivot supports. I think we were both getting messages here.
That was pretty good.
There are things called stand lifts, which have a band that go around somebody and their legs go on it. It actually helps somebody stand up. And then there are the barrier-free lifts. So there are all kinds of things. Rather than going over them here, you'll have specific training in the home when those come up as being a need. And as we mentioned earlier, you can have overlap training time with another person who might be well-versed in how to use the equipment. Or you can call us and we can come out to the home and help. So there are lots of resources, but knowing how to do, what did the Transformers used to say? Knowing is half the battle. Those are for the people who are over 30 there. But if you're not, just knowing that you have resources and you don't have to say, well, I think I get it, and then put yourself at risk of injury. We don't want that to happen. We don't want your consumer to be injured either. So now's the video. There's one slide away. So we're going to go over to another video now. And this looks at how children naturally lift in the correct manner, and it demonstrates the correct manner to lift. Next thing we're going to discuss is a change in status form. These have been provided to consumers, and they're also available to consumers on the website, which is the MyGSIL website, which is just a great website if your computer is available in the home or a phone is available or your consumer hasn't used it. Encourage them to look at it. It's wonderful. So what is a change in status? A change in status means that something has happened to a consumer that affects their health or well-being. And the reason we want to know about it is so that we can help them with it. So examples are that somebody is developing a red portion on their behind that looks like it might turn into a pressure sore. What do? Well, you tell the person, because on a consumer-directed program, they are directing their life, they're directing their program, and like any other adult, they have the right to ask you to maybe take an intervention of putting some lotion on it and see what happens, or they would like to have the doctor called, or they would like you to do something for it. So give them the option of doing it. They also have the option to do nothing, because as an adult, that can be their choice. They say, well, we'll just leave it, see what happens. However, you have to make sure that you are also protected, because you have to have a way of documenting that I saw there was an issue, I brought it up, and the consumer exercised their right to do nothing. That's fine. That way it can't come back and say, geez, you wash her every day. Did you not see that was red before her leg fell off? And so this is a way of protecting you and giving us an opportunity to discuss the situation with the consumer. It's not telling on anybody. It's not, doing a behind your back report. In fact, on the consumer status change report, it says that you've talked to your consumer and that they are understanding. But what is a change in status? And there's no good answer for that. It basically is something that you say, I don't think this is good. And it might be somebody's having difficulty breathing, that they seem cognitively confused, which is also an early sign of a urinary tract infection or another illness, so sometimes that's important. Or somebody's gotten a temperature, or they have that red spot we were talking about. We have some other examples here. A witnessed fall. So you saw somebody fall, which is also an incident report. You'd have to call us if there's a fall. And please, anytime there's a fall, call us so that we can make sure there's good follow-up. Choking, an allergic reaction, a change in sleep pattern. And you might say, what? Say, well, the consumer tells me that she wakes up every morning at 1 o'clock and can't get back to sleep until 5 o'clock. There might be underlying reasons that they could use support for. So this is an opportunity to provide additional support, but also an opportunity to demonstrate that you witnessed a change and you took the appropriate action. And that's what this is important for. So anytime you see something like that, either do a change of status form, ask your consumer for a change of status form. If there's not one available in the home, because not everybody has a computer and not everybody has a printer, call us. The nurse coordinators are happy to help you fill it out, or the program coordinators. So that's how you do the change of status. Now that brings us on to some other things. So what do you do if you're worried about your consumer's health?
You tell them.
That's the good thing to do. This is sometimes what happens, though. People might say, well, gee, Joe, I know you're diabetic and you just ate that entire birthday cake, and that's probably challenging for you, and now you're asking me to go get another one, and I just don't feel good about that. What do? Well, in a consumer-directed program, the consumer has the cognitive capacity to make their own decisions. There's been no guardianship established, there's been no activated durable power of attorney established. So legally, the person has the right to make bad decisions as well as good decisions. And I have worked with someone who had a multitude of health problems, including diabetes, and his lifespan was probably going to be fairly limited. And he said, you know what, I have 6 months to live. If I want to eat tiramisu, I'm eating tiramisu. And that was his plan. We wrote it down, and the worker then was able to go out and get him tiramisu. Was always able to go out and get him tiramisu. But some people feel very uncomfortable. They think, he shouldn't be allowed to do this.
It's not your choice to make.
Allowed is an interesting word, isn't it? And who is not going to allow him to do that? And who is not going to allow you to use dye in your hair that might cause cancer, or have a cell phone that could cause... But where is that line? Well, the line is exactly where you just said. It's not our choice to make. Inform someone. If you're truly concerned enough that you just don't feel good about it, call a coordinator. And we may choose to talk to that person about your concern, and it's probably legitimate. But then again, we will be able to say that this is the person exercising their adult right of choice. They are making an informed decision, and they can do that. You may still not feel comfortable working with that person and may choose to work with another consumer for that. That's your right. So we would never ask you to work for anybody that you felt uncomfortable working with. But at least this allows us to have a dialogue and try to work things out. Again, if you don't tell us, we can't do anything, and we'd hate for you just to be frustrated one day and say, I've had enough of this. So remember, it says your consumer is an adult and has the same rights and choices to make healthcare decisions that we do. And a lot of people choose not to treat things. My favorite topic, universal precautions. Yay! You look so excited. Everybody out there, I hope you're standing up and clapping and being very excited about this. Universal precautions are something that we really didn't do in nursing until the 1980s, when the AIDS epidemic became rampant. We often would wash our hands, and we learned about surgical integrity and sterile fields and things like this, but we still did not in every situation take the precautions that would keep both us and our patients, consumers, or clients, because we've called folks different things other than people over the years. So universal precautions are exactly what it says. They are steps that we take universally in every situation, and they're precautions, things that reduce our potential of either getting infected or spreading infections. So the premise behind this is you just assume everybody has something you can catch. And if somebody swears to you they have something that you can't catch, you say, well, I don't think I have anything, but I'd hate to be the one that did it to you. So in every single situation when you are touching a person's body, you are going to have a barrier between you and their body. Most often that means gloves. The number one way to not spread germs is good hand washing. And as a nurse, I listen to people wash their hands more than you would imagine. It even frightens me sometimes. The standard is to wet your hands up to the wrists, to put soap on them, to sing happy birthday to you twice.
Scrub your fingernails.
Scrub your fingernails like this, scrub your wrists like this, and then rinse with things going downhill so that they can go down. With paper towels, if you don't have an automatic faucet, use paper towels to shut off the faucets, because there's no sense cleaning your hands and then putting them on dirty faucets and being dirty all over again. And then putting on gloves before you do personal care. Now, gloves are also interesting. Gloves can act like your hands, and when you put them in something contaminated, they are then contaminated.
You have to kind of fold it back and use the clean part of the glove and use the other
That's
glove to peel it off.
That's the
how I do it.
cool nursing technique. That's advanced stuff. I like that.
When you're in a retirement home and you deal with feces on the floors and stuff, you definitely don't want to touch it again.
Well, there's nothing you want to touch there usually, but what happens with universal precautions that some people aren't thinking about is that they feel protected because of the gloves, but the gloves can pick up germs that you don't see, and if you take that glove and then touch a doorknob or something, you can still transfer germs to a place that when you take your gloves off and then touch the doorknob, you're in as much trouble as you were if you had just put your hand on a wound. So we're going to talk a little bit about the procedure that's best for universal precautions. Now, this is the thing that I tell everybody about universal precautions. You should use them all the time, but you absolutely must use them if you're going to touch something that is warm, wet, and not yours. So that's the big thing. And what is warm and wet and not yours? Any of the bodily fluids that we will discuss later on, because they all have the potential to transmit some type of disease. So the ways to protect yourself and your consumer is to understand that just because you don't appear sick doesn't mean that you don't have something that's contagious. If you think about something as innocent as the flu, many of us, especially working people, will be sick, you don't feel good for a few days, you're sneezing, you're coughing, but by the time you actually say, oh my God, I'm sick, you've probably been contagious for 3 days. And at that point,
If not, you're still a carrier, too.
you're still a carrier, but it's also too late for the people 3 days before. So if you're using universal precautions, then you're protecting from things that you don't know are contagious yet. So does that make sense? If you just use it all the time, you eliminate that 3-day window. So always wash your hands also before preparing, serving, and feeding meals, not just when doing personal care. And wherever blood is present, you can see it's easy. But if there's something present that might be carrying blood that might be too small for you to see, you also want to use it then. Or when cleaning urinals or urinary bags for catheters, bedpans, anything that, again, has something that's warm, wet, and not yours, you want to be careful. Also, wear gloves when you are in contact with any open areas in the skin, or toothbrushing, which we don't always think of, but your gums can bleed and that can certainly have a transmission potential, or shaving. A lot of our consumers would like you to shave either their feet or their axilla, their legs, and if nicks occur, then you can have a blood exposure. Many of our consumers are diabetic. Not all of them can handle the Accu-Check machines and the little lancelets that you get. That is something that you can do as a PCA, but it's a potential exposure situation. We cannot, under any circumstances, give injections such as drawing up insulin or something, but there are certain medications that come in a pen form, which just require the consumer to push down to inject it, and we can help them place it in those situations. But again, exposure potential, so be very, very careful. Also, tissues. A lot of people don't think of mucus as being a potential exposure risk, but it is. So proper hand washing techniques, which you were just talking about. Wash your hands with warm water and soap. So a consumer has some obligations here. They have to provide you with pump soap, because you don't want to be using the same soap bar that goodness knows who else is using, or if it's been rinsed in between. And they have to have a place where you can clean your hands, and either have, through your own efforts at laundry, make sure that you have clean towels available, or have paper towels available. So there has to be a place in the consumer's home where you can wash your hands and where you can have access to a restroom that's clean if you need that. And when you're washing your hands, use warm water and soap. It's really, a lot of people will use the I'm sorry, I can't think of what you call it, the antiseptic rubs that they have. And they will think that that does everything. It really doesn't. It reduces the germ load, but it doesn't eliminate the germ load. Washing is still the best. So even if you've used some of those, make sure that you wash your hands as soon as you can. Scrub between your fingers.
Germ-X and stuff.
I'm sorry?
I think you're referring to like Germ-X.
That's exactly what I'm talking about. Thank you. Sometimes doing this, thoughts leave your mind in the middle of it. So go in between your hands. You'll notice I have short nails and no rings, and you'll see that in a lot of nurses and healthcare people. It's not that I wouldn't love lovely nails. I think they would be great. It's just that they harbor germs, and I'm not willing to take the risk of either infecting myself, my family, or my consumers. Rings, and a lot of people will not want to remove a marriage engagement or a commitment ring. But underneath rings really can harbor things. So move your ring when you are washing your hands, and when you're drying your hands, move your ring.
I normally take my rings off before I even go into bacterial situations.
Which is the better thing to do.
You don't get the germs under it, and then you keep your rings clean for when you re-put them on
That
after.
is the better thing to do. But again, not everybody wants to remove all rings. So if you do leave a commitment ring on, just make sure you're cleaning around that and under that and drying. It says wash for a period of 30 to 45 seconds, as long as it takes to say the ABCs, and that's not A, B, C, D, no, just A, B, C, like that would be good. And rinse with the fingers facing down and thoroughly dry your hands. And again, I would add to that, make sure that when you shut the water off, you're using a paper towel or something that you can take care of and not re-contaminate your hands. Now we're on to blood-borne pathogens. We're going to need Ian, who is our wonderful videographer today, to put in some special audio effects for that one. Blood-borne pathogens are microorganisms, so bacteria, virus, little crawly things that live in your blood and can cause illness or harm to humans and are transmitted by blood. There are some that we are very familiar with from the news, like human immunodeficiency virus, HIV, which turns into AIDS. And there are some other things that are far more widespread and you should worry about more, like hepatitis B or C and Ebola. I mean, we just read about an Ebola outbreak again in Africa, and that's a blood-borne disease. You've heard there are also things that are in body fluids, like the Zika virus, and nothing you want to bring home for yourself or your family. So those are just some different examples of some. And in what bodily fluids can they be transmitted? Well, here's the warm, wet, not yours list. And that includes blood, saliva, vomit, urine, semen or vaginal secretions, stool, mucus, tears, or eye gook, or mucus,
anything that comes out of the body.
Anything. If it's not yours, you want to make sure that you treat it with caution or precaution. So infection control. The basic way to avoid the spread of infection is to know how disease gets transmitted and find out how you can interrupt that. And basically, in order for disease to be transmitted, you need three things. You need the disease. So either you have a person with the disease or a surface with the disease or a contaminated food with the disease. Then you need a way for it to get to you. And then you have to be susceptible, because sometimes we can be exposed to a disease, but our health is really good, our immune system is robust, and it fights that off and we never become ill. So if we either have a great immune system, or we stop it from getting to us, or we take care of it at the source, we're not going to get sick. And these are some different ways to do that. So in order for the germ to get to us, or the disease-causing agent, there are limited ways that it can happen. Droplet contact is the most difficult one to contain, and that means somebody sneezes into the air, and these very, very small particles, which are light enough to go floating around, do that. We inhale them, and we inhale sufficient amount that we become infected. That we can reduce the chance of exposure there by encouraging people, if they're able, to cough into their elbow area and to at least have good hygiene if they cover their cough with a hand. But not everybody that we work with is able to do that. We work with people with varying degrees of paralysis, so there are going to be times when our exposure risk is higher because of that. Direct physical transmission, touching an infected person, including sexual contact, and that would be if you were providing skincare to an open wound or something. And it's funny, as a human being, it's so easy to scratch your eye or something, and we actually are the transmitter ourselves inadvertently sometimes. There's also indirect physical contact, so you touch a contaminated surface. So somebody had, God forbid, cut themselves and had a face cloth on it, say shaving, and they held it there and there was blood, and they put it down on the counter, and you came afterwards and you picked that up and you didn't realize there was blood on the bottom of it. Or on the counter itself afterwards, you would end up getting it. Airborne if an organism lives outside of the body, and that's different from the droplets. For instance, rodent feces are terrible transmitters of disease, and what can happen is that they can get, say there's a mouse in the house, which happens occasionally, and the mouse has a dropping, and the dropping is contaminated. This sounds like the ear bone's connected to the eye, but what can happen is that after that dries out, if you're sweeping the floor, it can get into dust and go up in the air, and you can breathe it in and have contamination. There can be mold spores that you can be contaminated with. So that's another. And then the final one is the fecal to oral route, which is contaminating eating or drinking contaminated food or water. And there have been some horrific examples of that at salad bars and things like that. There was recently a recall, I believe, of contaminated lettuce in 3 states here where people had become infected. E. coli is very common. So you can choose only to eat food that you have washed and prepared, or you can choose to take the risk of eating what may be publicly available food, and one of the risks is that you might have an infection. One of the things a lot of people don't think about is when you're working for your consumer and you might be preparing a melon or a squash or something that you're going to cut into, washing it before cutting it is important, because when you
can pull
press,
it through the
yes,
fruit.
exactly, and it's not something that comes to mind readily,
No,
but
you can have
that's,
little bugs and stuff walking over it before you cut it and stuff.
and that's the least of the problems. There can be all kinds of stuff. Oh, you remember it goes from hand to hand,
I was
from
gonna
person in
say,
trucks,
somebody
and
picks up their dog's
That's-
poop outside,
you
picks a
got it.
melon, something gross.
no, but that's exactly the concern, and that's why you want to wash it first. So that's important. So those are different ways it can spread. And then, of course, it has to find a susceptible host. And there are some things we can control and some things that we can't. Stress affects our immune system. And although we can't always control the amount of stress that we get, sometimes we can control how we deal with the stress, which can have it lessen the effect on our immune system. Nutrition. Overbody requirements or underbody requirements can also affect the health of your body and its ability to fight off infection. Genetic makeup. Sometimes you were just born the way you were born and you don't have a robust immune response system. And then sometimes there are things that you acquire. So somebody with a low white blood cell count, such as with leukemia, or if you have just recovered from an infection and your body has used up all of its resources, you're going to be more susceptible to having another infection. And compromised immune systems, like with HIV or other diseases. And sometimes having been on a big course of antibiotics reduces the normal flora in your body and also will make you more susceptible. So what do? You just do the best you can to have a stress mitigation way. For instance, if you had a very stressful day at work, you might have a hobby. You might like to sit back and watch television. You might play guitar. You might dance or surf or sing. But having some kind of outlet really helps to reduce stress in a really good way. Taking care of yourself. Remember you said you had called in when you thought that your back had been strained. That was a perfect way to avoid additional injury.
It was mostly just a sore back, you know.
But you were thoughtful about the way you treated your body, and I think being thoughtful helps a lot.
Luckily, in that situation, I was able to call in somebody that I knew personally that Kathy was okay with coming to help her out.
And that's one of the things we said, if you talk to your consumer, what is their backup plan? What do you want me to do if I can't come in? And knowing about that in advance is fabulous, because then you at least don't feel that you need to put yourself at risk, because we don't want you to be at risk either. All right. We're going to talk a little bit about some different things that might bring people to GSIL. So the PCA, or Personal Care Assistance Program, the one that's only available through GSIL, that has the different parameters, such as you need to have 2 hours a day or more of personal care, and you need to have 80% or more of your time in a wheelchair. You notice we didn't say you have to have multiple sclerosis, or you have to have a spinal cord injury, or you have to have muscular dystrophy or cerebral palsy. The reason we don't say that is it doesn't matter to us what brings you to Granite State Independent Living. What matters is that there is a gap between what you can do, how you can function, and what your care needs are. And that gap can be filled by a person acting as your hands or legs. And so when we get a referral, we go out as nurses and we do a care assessment, and we learn about the person and how they spend their day, and really into great details, such as how much time does it take you to shower, what help do you need showering, can you do some of your upper care, can you raise your arms above your shoulders, can you do hair care. So a lot goes into developing a care plan like that. But even though it doesn't matter to us what brings you. It is important in care and the way that you might transfer somebody or the way that you might assist somebody in doing it. So we're going to talk about some of the general things that bring people to Granite State Independent Living, and they'll be different, and you may see some of your consumers reflected here, but not every reason is here. Spinal cord injuries is a major cause of need, and spinal cord injuries can happen through illness. You can have cancer that might cause an injury, or through traumatic injury, a car accident, a skiing accident. A diving accident is a very, very common. Unfortunately, people will land on their head and crush and break their necks. And depending on where the injury occurs on your spine reflects generally what the functional disability is that you'll have. So the higher on the spine that the injury occurs, the more complications you'll have. A very low spinal injury, you may have either partial or no use of your legs, and as you go up the spinal cord, it becomes higher until you get really high up of C6 or above, and you start to lose function of your arms, your hands, your fine motor control, your shoulders. Some people have a high enough injury that they're not even able to breathe without an assistive device like a ventilator. Again, we mention this not because it is important to know what the consequences are, but just that depending on where it is, you might understand better the type of assistance that somebody might ask you for. There are two types of spinal cord injuries. There's a complete and an incomplete. So you can completely sever your spinal cord, or you can maybe have had a severe movement of your neck that only causes it to tear on one side, or maybe only in different areas, not all of the nerves are affected. So sometimes people who you look at and functionally they're paralyzed, they may still have internal organ sensation or things like that, and that's really unkind, because it means you can still feel pain but not be able to move or change things. So understanding again that just because somebody has broken their fifth cervical vertebrae, they've fractured their vertebrae and broken their spinal cord in that area, doesn't mean they're going to have the same consequences or sequelae as somebody else who has done the same thing. So a complete injury means that there are really no functioning nerves from the spinal cord below that level of injury, and incomplete means that there may be some function or sensation. With complete spinal cord injury, people are at risk of something called autonomic dysreflexia. And we bring this up because this is a situation that is, until you are accustomed to it, very difficult to observe and frightening to some degree. So the short version of autonomic dysreflexia is that the nerves below the injury of the spinal cord injury still are accepting input from the environment. It just can't be transferred to the brain so that action can be taken. So an example of that might be that somebody is transferred into their power chair and you didn't notice that the hairbrush was on the seat of the chair because you were too busy adjusting knees and things. And when the person is transferred, because they have no sensation, they don't feel the hairbrush, but it is providing this noxious stimuli to the body. Another example is, and this is the more common one, somebody who has a urinary catheter. There might be an interruption in the flow of urine so that it's backing up into the bladder and the bladder becomes bigger and bigger, and that can cause a problem. Some people can have autonomic dysreflexia for something as gentle as a touch of the bedclothes on their legs. So again, it's different for different people. So what happens? Basically, below the level of the injury, all of the blood vessels constrict, which means they get smaller, and so above the level of the injury they remain normal. The blood below the level of the injury is forced up. Exactly. So your blood pressure will get very high. A person might get flushed, they might perspire, they might feel a pounding headache, or they might hear their heartbeat in their ears. Most people who have autonomic dysreflexia are aware of what the stimulants are that cause it to occur. And again, some people will just say, you're going to move my legs first thing in the morning, the bedclothes are going to have it, I'm going to have an autonomic dysreflexic reaction. Some people call it AD. And then sometimes it happens for other reasons, like the catheter. So what do you do if it happens? You talk about it before it happens. That's the biggest thing. Ask your survivor of spinal cord injury, or sometimes somebody who has advanced multiple sclerosis might have autonomic dysreflexia as well. So talk to the person. Do you have it? If you do, what would you like me to do? Most commonly, they're going to say, I'm going to have you check my catheter, you're going to reposition me, see if anything is going on, we'll see if I can lean back in my chair and fix it. Then you say, okay, so what if it doesn't resolve? What action then? And very often someone will say, well, if it doesn't resolve in 10 minutes, I'm going to have to call 911. And the reason is, with that very high blood pressure really concentrated in your upper body, the person's at high risk of a stroke because it's just too much. So some people have this happen several times a day all the time, and they just know how to deal with it, and it's no big deal. Some people it's fairly new to, and they're concerned. But the main thing to know is that when you have this happen with your consumer, having spoken with them first is really important, but then ask them, what would you like me to do? And they'll probably be able to tell you, and it's likely to be able to be resolved in those situations. So, along with autonomic dysreflexia, in a situation with a spinal cord injury or another nerve-based disability such as multiple sclerosis, you might get something called neurogenic bladder or neurogenic bowel. If you are going to work with a person who has that, you will receive specialized training both from a nurse and from your consumer. But what I want to share with you is that this is, of all situations we deal with at Granite State Independent Living, this is the time when you want to bring dignity to the table. So what a neurogenic bowel is it means that the bowel can no longer compress and the stomach can no longer compress so that you can have a bowel movement. And if you can't have a bowel movement, you're going to die. There's not another outcome to that. You're going to explode inside. So not only are you going to die, but it's not going to be pleasant. So what do? Well, a worker has to physically assist somebody to have a bowel movement, and that is what it's called, physically assisted evacuation. And that might mean for that small period of time every day, your consumer has to have this done, and most consumers do not like the fact that this has to happen. There's very little that's good about it other than you don't die. So if you can learn that skill and bring your dignity and good attitude to the table, get it done and go on with the day, people will love you forever. Neurogenic bladder is basically the same thing. You can't independently urinate, but it's much easier to take care of. As a result of that, people have several things that are done. They do something called intermittent catheterization, which means that they put a tube up their urethra so that they can urinate 5, 6, 7 times a day. Or they have an indwelling catheter, which is the more common thing. It's often referred to as a Foley catheter, which is a tube that goes into the bladder to allow urine to come out. Some people have a supra, meaning above the pubic bone catheter, which means they've had a surgical hole placed in their stomach so that a tube can go into their bladder and again have the urine come out. The advantage of that is you're not sitting on a tube if you're a woman in particular. That's important. So a lot of people will choose that surgical option because it reduces the chance of infection and sores from having the tube in your urethra. But we'll talk a little bit more about catheter care. So that's neurogenic bowel and bladder. Another thing that might bring you to our PCSP program is if you are blind or have very low vision and you might need assistance with your activities of daily living, not that you can't go out and have a job and different things like that, but that you might need help in the morning, maybe with meal preparation or at least assistance with that, if not fully done. There are some things that we try to share with the public as workers, and that is that blindness does not mean that you have low intelligence. It doesn't mean that you're deaf. Screaming at a blind person does no good whatsoever. If a person does have a service dog, we ask that you remember, no matter how cute they are, and they're always cute.
They're working.
They're working. It is. They're on the job, and that you can't. You may ask, and some people might say yes. I know Jen, who we saw at the beginning, has a service dog named Journey. I believe she's an Australian Shepherd, and she is the most beautiful dog you've ever seen. And I just have to say, nope, can't touch the dog. She's working. But just that's important to remember. And then with somebody who is blind or has low vision, there are just some things that, as a friend, you might do. This is when dining out, you might offer to read the menu, including prices. You might mention how a door opens to the right or left, the stairs going up or down, or you might not. So what you want to do is you want to ask the person, again, how can I help you in the community? Is there anything I can do? And I say, no, I'm fine. I've been doing this for 15 years. I'm going to continue to be able to do it. But if you're working with somebody in their home, the thing that's really, really important to remember is don't rearrange anything.
Mm-hmm.
Put everything back where it is, because very often a person who is blind or has low vision, when you're not there and the lights aren't on, they're going around, they're doing everything they need to do because they know where things are.
I had a blind in my retirement home that I could actually tell which way his blanket was just by walking up to his bed and touching it real quick. Like, it's ridiculously
People
accurate.
become very sensitive, yeah.
And there are other, like, sensory
Yeah, people can
outlets.
feel air currents and
Mhm.
different things, and there's some evidence that people can actually feel the change in air pressure if they're slowly walking up to a wall or something. So, and some people do echolocation
Mhm.
now. It's just fabulous. However, as far as we're concerned, don't rearrange your house.
Yes. No, never.
And common disabilities that bring people to Granite State Independent Living are muscular dystrophy, which is a genetic disorder, but it's also about 300 different kinds of genetic disorders, from spinal muscular atrophy to Duchenne's muscular dystrophy. And again, just because somebody has muscular dystrophy, how it manifests can be very different. There's something called Becker's, which may not present as severe, but goes over a long period of time. They're just... It's important to come to the table and ask the person, how would you like me to assist you? And multiple sclerosis, cerebral palsy, dementia, because we do, under the PCSP program, where somebody can have an authorized representative that can bring you Alzheimer's, which is a type. Hearing impaired, morbid obesity, if somebody has reached a certain weight and they're no longer able to care for themselves, either by toileting or doing their activities of daily living and showering, that could bring them. Also, pain-related issues can bring people to Granite State Independent Living. All right, so on to catheter care. Not everybody that we work for has a catheter, but some people do, and again, you'll receive specialized training if you are working for somebody who has a catheter. We're going to go over some of the very basics here. There are the different types of catheters. We talked about two placements, but they're basically indwelling, intermittent, or external. So indwelling means there's a tube going into the bladder, and that's either through the urethra, through the penis, or through the urethra of a woman, or through the abdomen with a suprapubic. And then there's external, which is available for a man. There is a female external, but it's not widely used. And the male external catheter is called a condom catheter. So it goes on like a condom, but takes the urine away from the body and brings it down to a bag. And then there are several types of collection bags. One is the leg bag that you can see in the middle on the slide, and that's often used for people who are going to be up and about in their chair or the community. It doesn't hold as much as a regular collection bag, but it can be worn under garments, under pants or shorts or something like that. And then
It's
there's
discreet.
It is discreet. I love that word. I'm going to steal that from you. That is absolutely discreet. And then there is a larger urine collection bag, which some people use in their wheelchair, either with or without a cover, because they can go for longer periods of time without assistance, without having to have it emptied. Then we talked about the suprapubic, the male Foley, female Foley, and condom. So how do you go about just basically taking care of it? So again, you always want to wash your hands and you want to have your gloves. But with catheter care, you want to take it a little bit further. You want to make sure that you have everything you need before you start. And the reason for that is you'll find there's nothing worse than being there and saying, "Oops, I need this, run, run, run. Whoops, I need this, run, run, run. And I'm changing my gloves, I'm washing my hands again." Get everything you need. And if the person has a bedside table, it's really helpful to use that. If not, you might want to bring something else over, put down a chucks or a cloth or something, put your supplies on it, and start. So you're going to need something to wash the area with, something to rinse the area with, because you don't want any soap residue. You're going to want to have something to dry the area with, and then something to clean the catheter tubing with. If you're going to be changing the bags, you want those things with you. Again, it will be gone over in detail if you happen to work with somebody more specifically. But the basic principle that you want to know is no matter where the catheter goes into the body, and some go in the abdomen and other ways, you always want to clean away from the site. We say away. And the reason is that you are mechanically moving any germs away.
Instead of pushing it into
Yes, that is exactly it.
Yeah.
And then when you're cleaning the catheter tubing itself, you want to hold on to it because you don't want to pull it out, but you want to go, no matter which way it is, it's away again, so you want to go away from the body. And if you just remember that principle, that you want everything with you, you want your hands clean, the environment clean, and you want to go away, you'll be fine. So, again, you'll receive more training if you need that specifically for your consumer. And this talks about, again, cleaning the catheter away from the insertion site. Then, of course, the urine goes into the drainage bag, and what do you do? Well, emptying a drainage bag is very easy. Either a leg bag or a collection bag has a valve on it that will release the urine, and you will have either a designated container or most often a urinal. A lot of people will use a male urinal, whether it's a man or a woman, it doesn't matter because it's a great vehicle to catch it with. So what you need to empty the urine is you need a urinal, you need a place to dispose of the urine. I always like to put a little Chucks or a paper towel or something on the floor because there are often a couple of drips when you're opening or closing the valve. And you want to be able to wash yourself, empty the urinal, everything afterwards. So again, you bring everything to the consumer, you release the valve, let it flow into the urinal, you close the valve, you wipe the valve with a paper towel so there aren't any extra drips, you take everything off the floor, then you take the urinal into, and don't empty the urinal in the sink. Some people make that mistake.
Gross.
Just
Wash your
saying,
hands there.
I'm just saying some people make that mistake. It goes in the toilet with the seat up, and then you dispose of any paper towels. The urinal itself has to be cleansed, and you're thinking about it, you're emptying it with 2 gloves, but you're holding the urinal with gloves, so you're going to want to take one glove off so that you can go and open doors and things like that, but keep the glove on the hand that has the urinal until after that's done, and then you can take that one off too. So that afterwards, each consumer has a different way of cleaning the urinal, but you're going to want to clean it after it's been used either with soap and water. Some people use a 10% bleach solution, but and there are some commercially available products. Your consumer will tell you how they prefer to do that. The drainage bag, which is the larger bag, you are able to empty it the same way. But we also might have to change it. So changing the drainage bag, the leg bag, you will end up changing it a lot because you often will put it on during the day and off at night. And the way that you change it is you're going to have to pinch the upper tubing so that it doesn't
Continue flowing.
Continue flowing, that's it. And after you want to empty the bag first, and then you'll disconnect that, and you'll put on the overnight bag or the collection bag. And then you can, once that's hooked up, then you can either clean, which they are reusable, so you clean them until they're not able to be cleaned well anymore, or just change the collection bag. After that, the next morning, you'll put a clean one on. The collection bag for the larger collection bag is a little bit more difficult to change. Again, you want to make sure that it's empty before you start. You're going to still want to kink that, but you also, when you're putting a new one on, you want to take some alcohol and clean both edges. And the reason for that is that these stay on a long time, and they really can create
Bacteria.
Yeah, that's exactly it. Any questions so far?
No.
All right, now we're going to talk about skin. Skin is the largest organ in the body. You know, we think of the heart and the liver and the pancreas, different organs like that, but skin is everywhere.
It's actually your biggest organ.
It is your biggest organ, that's it. And it does a number of things. It provides protection to the internal environment. It keeps fluids in. It allows you to feel things. It's all full of nerves. Thermoregulation, which is body temperature regulation. It helps to keep we warm-blooded animals warm instead of losing all of our heat. It helps with body image. If you have a scar or something, you know, if your skin is impacted in some way, it may affect your body image. If you have a pressure sore, that can really affect body image. It works with so many different things, and it breaks. So it breaks in a number of ways. One of the ways it breaks is with a cut, of course. And another way it breaks is with a friction injury. So if you are pulling somebody towards you rather than rolling them, they can actually lose some skin. Not good. But what we're going to talk about now are pressure ulcers. Pressure ulcers are also referred to as bed sores or decubitus ulcers, and they are one of the most dangerous and horrific things that can happen to somebody who has reduced mobility. And the reason they're so bad is that they are very challenging to heal. They can get infected, they can smell horrific, they can be disfiguring, and they can also force somebody to have to remain in bed, so they might lose their freedom. Okay? And they take months to heal. It's not like they're going to heal in 7 to 10 days, which is what normal cuts heal in. So there are areas where you're more susceptible to them, and they are in the areas that they call bony prominences. So an example is your elbow. And even though I'm a large woman, there's not much between my bone and my skin right there. And you'll find that there are many areas on the human body where bone is very close to the skin. And in that area, you are very, very susceptible to having a pressure ulcer develop. So those areas tend to be the back of your shoulders, your elbows, your butt bones, for lack of a technical term there, especially for people who are sitting, but also your coccyx, which is the end of your tailbone, is very susceptible, and the ball of your foot and your heel, especially if you're in a wheelchair. And some people who have muscle spasms will press into the foot plates on their chairs on occasion, and that also can leave a person more susceptible.
I've noticed they also do that to kind of get themselves back in the chair if they feel like they're sliding.
So when you're
and
using
things like
the
that.
same things like that over and over, that area can become delicate. Another thing that can happen is if somebody is exposed to urine. For instance, if they're in an adult protective garment that is not changed frequently, that moisture and developing ammonia can make somebody more susceptible to a pressure breakdown. If they have poor circulation or diabetes or smoke cigarettes or anything, because the nicotine in cigarettes causes your blood vessels to constrict or get smaller, which impairs the flow of blood and everything to the body, which again makes it more likely to have a pressure sore. So there is a pressure ulcer video that we're going to watch. Pressure ulcers are something that we are charged as care workers of alerting our consumers about. Now, they also look different with people of different ethnic backgrounds. So on a person of Caucasian background, you might see a red area. On a person of African American or Asian background, you might see a darker area. That's good that you know that. I mentioned that because people say, well, I didn't see any redness or anything, and it's important to know that you won't necessarily. What you are looking for is a change. And the earlier you can pick up a change, the better the chances of preventing these turning into monstrosities are. Because what you can see is we talk about stages of pressure ulcers. So on our slide we have what stage 1 is, and that's just a reddened or a darkened, a discoloration. It might even be a hardness. You might feel a difference in the skin when you are washing somebody. And if you catch it then, and tell your person about it, they say, okay, I'm going to try to stay off of that area for the next few days. I'm going to have you put some extra lotion. I'm not going to put any constricting clothing on. If a person wears adult protective garments, they might choose just to put them underneath themselves for that time and let some air get at it. But there are steps that you can take that will lessen the chance of it progressing. Sometimes it just happens no matter what. Sometimes more damage has already been done underneath than you can see, because you can't always see what's going on. But that's the time to try to get them in to see their doctor or their wound care clinic, and to try to get the pressure off of it, and to be very active. But a lot of people are not picking up on that because they're washing a person, but they're not looking at the skin. So we have opportunities when we help somebody dress or undress, or when somebody has some washing done, to really do a good skin inspection, or when you're putting lotion on or some kind of skincare. Anytime, always be on the lookout, and always make an effort to look at those bony prominences where they can more frequently occur. So if it doesn't stop at that point, it will open up. Sometimes it looks like a popped blister, sometimes it looks like a scrape, but it will be open. And sometimes it will have a little bit of odor, or it will, as it mentioned in the video, weep. Not necessarily bleeding, it just can be wet around that area because you're having your bodily fluids leak out of you, literally. If it doesn't get stopped, then it's going to be going into the stage where recovery is lengthy. So stage 3, and you see it here on African American skin and Caucasian skin, stage 3 is a hole. It's going through the entire breadth of the skin. It's going down into the fat. And when you look at a person who has a stage 3, you look inside them and you say, I'm not supposed to be saying that, that's fat. And it can progress from then. I remember one lady, we rolled her over when she came in, and we could see her spine. And she passed away from complications of that when she did not survive it. So when they're open like this, they're susceptible to infection. You're losing fluids, you're losing proteins. There are just so many issues. They can burrow into a blood vessel and cause extreme bleeding. And there are just many different problems that you can have, and many require surgery at that point. So that's how important it is as a caregiver to be aware early on. They say the recovery expense from the average pressure ulcer is $20,000, not including hospital stay. And that means all the bandaging supplies and nursing visits and all of the different medicines that somebody might need for it. And on top of that, it can go quite a bit higher. So pressure ulcer prevention is really important. The next section we have is about abuse. We were very lucky at Granite State to just have had a presentation from Adult Protective Services, and they reiterated to us that yes, people have the right to live their own life and they have the right to not accept assistance, but we have the obligation in New Hampshire, and everyone has this obligation, not just a caregiver. So every person that you pass on the street, every citizen, every visitor to New Hampshire, if you're in New Hampshire, you have a legal responsibility to report abuse. So what is abuse? Well, the good thing to remember is that if you have a bad feeling about something, it just doesn't sit right with you, you don't have to know the legal definition if that is abuse or not. What you do have to do is call the Bureau of Elder and Adult Services and let them know what your concerns are. They will do an investigation and determine whether it meets the standard of abuse. So, thankfully, you just have to know some basic guidelines. So what things should you be concerned about? Concerns are if you see any physical abuse, and it doesn't just mean hitting, it might also mean restraining. If somebody has a lap belt that they can't get out of in their wheelchair, and you say, gee, you've been in that wheelchair since I was here yesterday and that belt's on, did you ever get to go to bed? So that's physical abuse also. Emotional abuse can come in many forms, just from saying, geez, if you would just drop dead, I wouldn't have to be stuck with your care, to even more aggressive types of emotional abuse. Verbal abuse can go right along with that. Financial abuse. Okay, Graham, can I have the checkbook? I'm going to go get groceries, and I'm coming back in a new car, and you no longer have any money in your bank account. Well, Graham might have given you that money, and that's hers, and that's fine, but that might have been taken, which is financial exploitation. Sexual abuse is not, again, just physical, but as we discussed in sexual abuse between consumers and workers, it can also be verbal, or it could be by forcing somebody to watch pornography, as we were just told by BES happens, unfortunately, in some of their subpopulations. Neglect. Now, neglect is interesting. If somebody is in a home and there are other adults available who are not taking care of that person, you might automatically think that's neglect. But it may not be, because if those other people hadn't assumed the responsibility of care and have said it's beyond what I can do, we have to have paid assistance in here, then it might not truly be neglect. And again, that's something that bees would find out for you. And then self-neglect, which also has a very broad scope of interpretation, but if you feel that somebody is really putting themselves at huge risk because of actions that they are taking or not taking, then again, you would have the opportunity to call the Bureau of Elder and Adult Services, and they could make that determination. You also have the right to report anonymously. So even though we have a duty to report, we do not necessarily have to disclose who we are. It's helpful if you do that, because then if they need more information, they can contact you, and it might really help the outcome of the case, but you're not obligated. So how do you call? Well, there is right here an 800-949-0470 number that you can call, and that will just be the intake number. You generally get a person who puts you through to a worker, and you then would get their voicemail, and then in the order that the complaints are received, they will be returned. It's open, I think, from 8 a.m. to 4:30 p.m. weekdays, but you can leave a message 24/7. And so once you have done that, should you do a BEES report or make a report of abuse on a consumer of Granite State Independent Living, please also call the coordinator so that we can follow up. We talked a little bit earlier about HIPAA. So now we're getting a little fragmented, and we're going to talk about a number of different specific laws that we have to be careful of. So HIPAA is the Health Insurance Privacy and Accountability Act, Portability and Accountability Act, and it protects your health information. It really is made a large difference in the flexibility of records transfer that you can get from one doctor to another. It's made a great deal of difference, and people have been able to correct glaring problems in their medical records, which used to take on a life of their own previously. And, it would say that you are left leg below the knee amputee, and here you are walking in on both your legs, and you're trying to explain, no, you see, I have my leg, and still it would persist in your documentation. So it has helped with that. And what it has done practically is that it's made a lot of people sign a lot of papers that say you understand that this is the case. But what does that mean to us? Well, we talked a little bit about it earlier. It means that we must maintain the confidentiality of our consumers. We may not share personal information. We may not share diagnosis. We may not say, oh, you've got one of those jazzy wheelchairs. My consumer got one of those and she loves it. Seems so innocent, doesn't it? But it's not. We can't share information. We can't say, oh, that's where I work, or my consumer's going to be on vacation for a couple of weeks, or her worker's going to be on a vacation for a couple of weeks. We can't even have somebody drop us off to work in front of their home unless we have their permission, because that's disclosing where a person lives. So anything that you talk about or see or hear at a consumer's house stops with you at their door and doesn't go home with you unless it's something you have to discuss with a coordinator. And the reason that's okay is that the consumer has already given written consent for the coordinator to be aware of what's going on with them. So this talks about specific instances that we've followed a lot of. One thing that we didn't talk about is that HIPAA also protects the privacy of a person in their home, according to the interpretation that our administrators have, and that means if you're in somebody's home, only go where your job takes you. For instance, if there are other people in the home who have bedrooms and have everything, and if somebody says, oh, will you get me this in my room on the way down, don't. Do not go only go where your consumer is. And we talked before about not doing chores for other people, so it's not like you'd be bringing laundry up and putting it in somebody's room. Because not only is that a privacy violation, but that leaves you at risk also. You don't want to be, a lot of people won't bring handbags in or things in the home so that it can be very clearly seen that I'm coming in and going out with nothing. So those are just good practices. Medicaid compliance. I told you we'd get to this eventually. So Debbie Kreider, who is our compliance officer, she's also our COO, and Karen Filbert, who is our Director of Performance Excellence, put this together. There is a lot of information on these slides, and I'd encourage the home viewers to please look at the slides, because I'm not going to read them all verbatim. But we have a responsibility to follow all of the rules and regulations that are set down for people who have Medicaid, that are set down for people who have the CFI waiver. And we not only have to make sure that the nurses and the providers in-house do it, but also that our consumers and in-home employees are aware of them. And the main thing that we want to do for compliance is avoid Medicaid fraud. So Medicaid fraud is putting down for time you didn't work, falsifying any type of documents that you might have, putting down that you worked and that you, and actually doing tasks that weren't on the care plan. For instance, I put down that I worked from 1 p.m. to 5 p.m., but at 4 o'clock we started putting up the Christmas tree, but I still billed until 5 o'clock. That's Medicaid fraud. So another thing is that a consumer can only bill Medicaid through one agency at a time, or one entity at a time. So if a consumer goes into the hospital is billing Medicaid, so therefore we cannot, and we ask you to please let us know if your consumer ever goes into the hospital or into a rehabilitation residential facility. But what happens if your consumer goes to the hospital and God forbid they had fallen and gotten blood on the floor, and they said, on the way out in the ambulance, they said, can you stay and clean that up? What kind of a dilemma is that? So you cannot bill Medicaid and stay and get clean up for that. What you can do is you can call us a Granite State, and we will assume the financial liability of that. We'll have you do a separate timesheet for that is a no-bill timesheet, so that you will get paid. The chore will be done that is needed to be done, because that's an exceptional situation, but that nobody will engage in Medicaid fraud. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. There are several other things that are pretty generalized. One of them is people just think, well, I'll never get caught. This is, just 15 minutes extra I'm going to put on the timesheet. Where will you possibly find out? There are so many places. Other workers tell you. I cannot tell you how many neighbors watch the comings and goings of people. It's kind of scary, actually. If you and your consumer have a falling out, your consumer might report you. So it's just really, during a redetermination, or a case manager, I'm sure they don't all come to light, but a lot of cases come to light, and we want you all to avoid ever having to be in that situation. Now, what happens to you if you're found to have Medicaid fraud? Well, we have an internal investigation. Certainly you're going to be suspended from your job at the very least. A report will go into the Bureau of Elder and Adult Services, and for 7 years you won't be able to work in the healthcare field. But there's also things that are very serious that we talk about that are financial and even penitentiary time. So any person that knowingly submits a false or fraudulent claim for payment of the United States government funds, and we use the timesheet or our electronic time verification system to bill the U.S. government, so that covers all these programs, they're liable for significant penalties and fines, and that ranges from $5,000 to $11,000 per claim. So that can happen multiple times in one day. Can you imagine that much money in fines? It can result in civil action. It can result in criminal action. It can result in never being able to receive any government assistance or Medicaid help for you and your consumer. Excuse me. So these consequences can be profound, and we beg of you, if there's ever anything that you're even slightly concerned about, we'd rather that you call and have it fixed than not do it. So say you were engaging in a behavior that just now you found out was fraudulent. We are not going to say, oh, you horrible person, we're going to send you to jail for everything you've been doing. We're going to provide you with information on how to do it correctly and expect that from here forward that you will. So if you have any concerns, please let us know so that we can help you fix it so it doesn't become a problem. So to be compliant, you bill only for the tests that you've completed, only the tests that are on the care sheet, only the hours that you work. You and your consumer review the timesheet daily, or if you're on the electronic visit verification system, just make sure that you sign in and out correctly. And double check things for accuracy. So any questions about that? So it is the responsibility of both the worker and the consumer to make sure that that's accurate, right? Now, we're going over at this part the timesheet policy, but on September 15th, 2018, so in 2 months, we are going to be going to all electronic visit verification except for instances of people who have absolutely no ability to have phone service, which are very few in New Hampshire. So in that case, people are going to have timesheet training, which will be separate, but we're going to go on to now how to use the advanced time and attendance telephonic timesheets. There's a mouthful. So what Advance is Advance is a method by which we're able to ensure that a worker is at a person's home during the hours that they say they're there. And the way that you do that is the consumer has a phone or more than one phone that they register. And we have that on file in our computer here, and you use only those phones to call in, and then when you arrive for your shift, you clock in by using a PIN number that you should keep private, not give it to your consumer or anybody, and you'll use your PIN number, then you'll use your consumer's number, and you'll have more specific training on this. And you'll use the program code, so there's a program code for PCA, there's a program for PCSP, and also for training time. So we have 002 if you have that training time that we talked about. There's also a mechanism if you're going to be going between the homes of two different consumers to have travel time compensated if it meets the criteria that we have, and we can talk more about that if that is the situation that any of you come up with. So with Advance, you sign in, and the computer recognizes the caller ID of that phone, so it will then take and store that information. During the day, you follow the plan of care, and you make a note of which activities you've done. For instance, you might do meal preparation, you might do showering or dressing. And each of those tasks on the consumer reference sheet, the plan of care that we talked about, has a number next to it. So laundry might be 07, and cleaning might be 06, and at the end of the day, when you go to clock out, you have that information available. Right, and that's what's going to ask. It's again going to ask for your employee number, it's going to ask for the consumer's number, it's going to ask for the program number. It will always start with that. And you'll tell it that you're clocking in or out, and it will say, enter the number of tasks that you've completed. And if you've done 3 things, or if you've done 7 things, and you'll never do more than 10 because that's about the limit in there, but say you've done 3 things, it will say enter the first code number. So first of all, when it says enter the number of tasks, you enter just the number, whether it's 1 or 5 or 7, using the keypad on the phone. When you're entering the task numbers, many of the tasks start with a 0. So it might be 01 or 04. If you don't put the 0 in, it won't
come up.
That's right, it won't come up, and then it will be rejected when they try to do it. And everybody wants to get paid, so let's try to make sure we do that correctly. And then when you're done with that, it will say thank you. At this time, you can hang up, or if you have to call payroll with any concern, you can call payroll. Now, say you put down the wrong task number. You're going to go, oh my gosh, I've got to fix this with payroll, so you'll dial 1. Many people think that that payroll call is linked to the call that they just made, so that payroll will have that information. They don't. It just goes to an answering system. So when you either call payroll or press the 1 to be connected to payroll, please make sure that on your message you leave your name, your consumer's name, your telephone number, and why you're calling. For instance, it might say, I put down on the timesheet when I clocked out on June 11th that I did laundry, and I didn't. It was supposed to be that I did grocery shopping. And call me if you have any questions. So they just need, who you are, how to contact you, who your consumer was, what date. That's exactly it. So if you call with that, that is fabulous. There is in every home a binder that says how to use this, and each consumer in the consumer-directed program will be training workers. However, on top of that, again, you always have us as a resource if you're not clear on that. I would rather do 10 trainings with you than have you not get paid because this didn't go well. So again, it's going to be starting on Saturday, the 15th of September, and I am so excited because timesheets, I like to burn a bonfire pile full of them. They are just cumbersome and difficult, and you have to make sure that they are physically here by a certain time period. Those worries are going out the window with Advance. It's just going to be one and done. You've done the phone call.
Save a bunch of trees.
It will save a bunch of trees. There is that. So, missed punches happen sometimes. And some examples might be that, for instance, you're on the PCSP program, which at this point, Granite State does not support driving on the PCSP program. So you have to clock out, and if you choose to drive the person somewhere, then you would do that, and you'd clock back in when you get there.
And you clock in for different programs too? Well,
and you will have to clock in and out for different programs. So you may be in the community, and the person may not have a cell phone that's an authorized phone. So obviously you can't call from the home phone when you're in the community, so you'll have to do a missed punch slip. And that is a super easy form to fill out. You can get to it on a cell phone, you can get to it on the computer. It's really quite easy. And so this is the instructions on how to do that, which you will all be able to look at. However, the easiest thing to know is that there is here a link that you can either type in or that you can click if you have access as you do here, and it will just come up. Or you can have a toll-free call to the number on here. It's 855-522-TIME, which is the phone number that you use for the electronic visit verification, so you can dial the 1 at the end and tell them that you're reporting a missed punch or a timesheet issue. Any questions about that?
No.
Okay. Travel time. Travel time is time that Granite State compensates you for at your regular hourly wage when you are traveling between consumers. It has to be that you leave one, go directly to the other, and it's not more than an hour of travel time. So if you stop working for John at noontime and you're scheduled to work with Robert at 12:30, you clock out at noontime, and then you're going to clock back in to travel time using 012 for the program ID. And then when you get to your next consumers, you're first going to clock out of the travel time, again using the 012, and then you'll clock in as you normally do. And that way we're able to compensate you for that time, but not bill Medicaid. Because again, we don't want to commit Medicaid fraud either. So that's how we avoid doing that, is by billing for that separately. On to some other things. If you have a job that you love and you think this is the greatest thing you've ever done, as I think you and I do, and you're saying, geez, but I'm only working 20 hours and I'd love to work 40, we have the GSIL registry. And what the registry is it is a document that our consumers, who are going to be hiring people, can look at to see if there's somebody on there who is looking for the hours that they need to fill. So say I wanted to pick up 4 extra hours, and the time I could do it was on Monday night between 7 and 11 or whatever that is. And I would have that specifically on the GSIL registry, and somebody would look at my name and they say, oh, I need her between 10 a.m. and noontime in the day, so that person's not going to work for me. But the person who needs somebody in the evening will look at that and say, geez, I actually need her between like 6 and 10. I wonder if I can do that. And they might call you and say, gee, do you have any flexibility in your start and end time? And you might find a perfect match. Or the person who needs exactly what you have up there is a perfect match. And you can say things like, no cats in the house, or I prefer a home with no smoking, or cannot do heavy lifts. So whatever your parameters are, you can put in there.
Mm-hmm.
And that allows our consumers to really look at that and begin
Fit their
to
needs.
Yeah, exactly. We also have for you and for all of our other workers something called the Attendant Care Hub. We've got forms on there. We've got links to that no punch form. We have links to the advanced time and attendance paper manual. We even have a video on there that tells you how to do it. We also have educational videos. We have contests, things that you can enter to be put in a drawing for a gas card. And we have a referral bonus. So if you refer another worker and you let us know that you're referring them, you'll get a bonus when they hit 6 months of work, which is not a bad thing.
I think it's like they have to work almost 15 hours a week, too.
Right. There are minimum expectations. So 15 hours a week is really, really, really part-time. But they have to do that, and they have to stay with us for a little while. And if they do that, you get a bonus, which is not a bad thing. And we have the address on our slides here, which is www.gsil.org. And GSIL Home Care is the username, and Choices, it's not in quotations there, but Choices is the password. So that is how you get on our Attendant Hub. So we talked a little bit earlier about stress management, and here are just some different ideas of taking care of yourself. Make sure that you meet your health care needs, take time for yourself, and we talked about maybe having a hobby. Keep your sense of humor. They used to say laughter is the best medicine, and that is still true. And use community and social resources. At Granite State Independent Living, there's an employee support program, so if you are coming onto life challenges that are overwhelming, you can always contact Human Resources here, and they can help you be in touch with that, and it's confidential. They don't know, nothing goes into your file. Human Resources doesn't know. It's just a resource that we have for you. Some frequently asked questions, and believe it or not, we're almost done. Yes, this video will come to an end. What do you do if you don't receive a paycheck?
Call GSIL.
Not just GSIL,
Payroll?
but payroll. Right, you can call a lot of the rest of us, but all we're going to say is you got to call payroll. So call payroll, and payroll's not going to answer because payroll's doing payroll. So you're going to get their answering machine. Be prepared again to leave your number where you can be reached, your name, the dates that you believe there's a discrepancy. That way they can look it up and get back to you
And
with
just
real
fix it.
right, and get back to you with real information. What should you do if your consumer's in the hospital? Please call Granite State Independent Living and let us know so that we can make sure that if you're doing something else, you're taking care of that, but we're not billing Medicaid and just...
Medicaid fraud.
Right. We don't want to do Medicaid fraud either. See, you were definitely listening. Thank you. Here's a good one. Should you come to work even if you don't feel well?
Yeah.
Maybe. Depends on what
Depends.
is, right? It
I was gonna
depends
say,
on
feeling well, how?
what it is, how sick you are, and what your consumer would like. So it's not just what you would like. So within your preferences, maybe you want to come to work and your consumer's like, yeah, no, I don't really want to take the chance of having the flu, it's okay. Or your consumer is like, oh, I don't care, I just need you here. Or it might be a compromise. Would you be interested in wearing a mask when you're here so that would reduce the risk of transmission?
Or maybe we only do part of our routine.
Or
just get me out
just
of
get the
bed
basics
and
done so
go
the
home.
exposure is lessened. Right. So the key is talk to your consumer and come up with a plan that suits both of you. And you might also want to have a plan, what do I do if my children are sick? What is your backup? What would you like me to do? How should I be engaged with that? That'll be really helpful. And then, is it okay to be friends with the person I work with?
During your work time.
There's no answer to that. There's just no answer. It's very easy to become close to somebody. I mean, you are providing essential personal services, and you're doing it as a professional, and I know that you have all kinds
No,
of
I was
thoughts.
gonna say, I guess my answer would be yes, as long as you stay within your boundaries.
That is the answer. That is the answer. So very often people become better friends after they have stopped working for someone. But the problem with friends is that there are then a different set of expectations than there are for work expectations. And sadly, that often leads to more problems than happiness. Because people will say, you forgot my birthday. Now, a worker may not be expected to know your birthday, but my friend should. So just silly things like that can lead to some strife that are good to avoid. And that is the end. So for you online folks, if you have any questions, please give us a call at 228-9680. And did you have any questions for us?
Actually, no, you covered it all.
Well, I thank you so much for your participation today. You were
Thank
absolutely
you.
wonderful. So all you who are watching at home, clap for our newest Granite State Independent Living
Oh,
star.
thank you.
And thank you all for your time.